Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku's Quirk Was Literally Adrenaline? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Blood. There was just so much of it. So much of it everywhere. It was leaking out of his body like water from a tap, slowly dripping with a repetitive and monotonous irritation that just rang all throughout Izuku's head at a constant pace, which only made it even more painful. Alongside this, he could feel the fractures and breaks in his bones, how his fingers were cracked and damaged almost beyond repair as proof of his exertion and his strife, how his lungs were steadily breathing in and out next to his unstable heart. As the blur around his vision began to wash over to the point where he could vaguely make out shapes and colors, Izuku knew what was going on. He was in Yui at the tournament. Then he was fighting Todoroki. It was at this point the burning hot flares that had previously been etched quietly into his skin began to claw back at him, becoming another reminder of his fight. In a moment of weakness towards his opponent, in a moment of kindness and compassion for Izuku, he had yelled out with all his might as his bones had rattled around inside him that the half-cold half-hot Quirk owner's abilities were his own and weren't his father's. The boy had then proceeded to decimate Izuku's body with his long-dormant fire powers. Not the smartest of moves. Chuckling slightly before recoiling at how it jostled around the bones in his chest, the green-haired boy decided to remain in his slumped position near the edge of the arena to regain any semblance of feeling in his body. If Todoroki was strong before, this new firepower was going to set him up leaps and bounds above the rest of Class 1A, maybe even the entire year. And then, like a flood, he remembered that this was being broadcast, that everyone in Tokyo was watching, that his friends were watching, that his mother was watching. He remembered his promise to himself and to everyone that he would get through this, to show them what he was truly like and how powerful he could be, that his dream wasn't a distant figment that could never be achieved. And then he remembered that he had thrown that shot out of the window when he spoke up and told Todoroki to use his powers. Sure, he was happy for his classmate, immensely so. Hell, he could write so much more in his notes about this discovery. However, he couldn't help but feel a nagging want in his soul, in his heart about not being able to show off to his fullest potential. Well, always next time. Then it hit him. Those eyes, he felt them staring into his soul, compelling him to move just that little bit more. That cloud of figures that existed in a plane not of this world with 8 pairs of eyes that glowed with such intensity and passion that Izuku could feel the drive flow back into him. Those eyes, the eyes of one for all. Gritting his teeth, Izuku made up his mind. He had given his all, his 100%, but to be a hero like All Might you needed to go beyond that, to reach the level of power and attainment that the previous one for all owners had. You needed to go beyond your everything. Before his eyes, flashes of the UCG villain incident arose, and he remembered how hard All Might had fought for them, how he was constantly going above his power to beat Nomu. And now he needed to be more than All Might. Curling his hand into a fist around the broken earth, he felt his bones mash and grind against each other unevenly, but he didn't care at this point. In an almost trance-like state, Izuku rose to his feet in a shuddered and shaking mess of human flesh. Soon, sound returned to his ears, yet all he could hear were the hushed whispers of the crowd and the sudden stopping of trainers dragging across the dirt. Lifting a shattered visage of his one-healed hand to his face, he gritted his teeth once more as attempted to rub the blur out of his eyes, only to cover his palm in a thin layer of blood that was welling up from his mouth. Smirking, Izuku's eyes decided to clear. Before him stood the clearly shocked form of Todoroki Shudo, the son of Endeavor, stuck in a phase of stillness that spread over the whole stadium. Twisting his head, the green-haired boy caught the eyes of several teachers and students who all looked upon him with inquisitive and impossibly large eyes of worry. Forgoing their attention for his opponents, Izuku cracked the bones in his hands in a painfully loud way that set every nerve in his body on fire, but to him all it did was fuel a newly built fire in his core. Round 2. Todoroki. In the stands, the rest of Class 1A could only look on in shock and disturbed glee as they witnessed the revitalization of Midoriya. None of them could have predicted this, That Izuku would be so willing and full of strength that he would be able to stand up and continue fighting after being so mercilessly beaten down by Todoroki's new powers and even his own Quirk's drawbacks. It was extraordinary what they were witnessing. Who knew Midoriya had it in him? Kirishima spoke up in a shaky voice, the red-haired boy glued to the scene before him just like the rest of the class. Why yeah, and all this is coming after he had already smashed his bones to nothingness beforehand. Gyro couldn't help but agree, the punk girl twirling her earphone jacks around her fingers to seize her ever-growing tension. Some members like Hagakure and Mina were gripping the rail in front of them so tight that I could snap at any minute, worry and concern etched into the pink-skinned girl's face while the shuffling of feet and constant creasing of clothing told of the invisible girl's feelings about the situation. Others like Mineta and Kaminari were looking on with glazed-over expressions with a mix of jealousy thrown into their concern for good measure, while some were unreadable like Shuji and Tokyoyami, who were looking at each other with an unknown expression regarding their classmate, and people like Ida and Momo were talking quietly about the possibilities of how this happened after Izuku had already taken this much damage. Some were like Uraraka, with the girl having folded in on herself with sheltered concern that leaked out into the world with her eyes still fully engrossed into the battle. And further still, others were like Bakugu who, while appearing uninterested and unconcerned, had their eyes locked onto the scene through the corners of their gaze. Best to say, everyone was waiting on bated breath to see the outcome of this new factor. With the teacher, they all watched in morbid curiosity as the crowd shuddered and cringed at the harsh cracking sound of Izuku's fist, the bones clashing against each other in a hard snap. Glancing at each other, they all began to quietly murmur about these new factors. Supposedly, the match should have finished a few seconds ago, but Izuku had gotten back up in time to still be in the game. And from this stand, All Might sat with a fierce veil of concern on his face as he looked upon young Midoriya. In his mind, Yagi couldn't help but feel responsible for this. It was his quirk that was making Izuku do this in the first place, make him hurt himself every time he tried to save someone or do any kind of heroic act, but also in his mind, he was confused and intrigued by Izuku's new actions. Sure, in his time being a hero he had had some exhilarating fights that had forced him to stand after being brutally beaten down, but this was something else entirely. While he was lost in thought, the quiet pitter-patter of footsteps drew the attention of no one as the principal made his way over to the skinny man's frozen form. Setting his tiny body down next to the man, the principal spoke in a hushed tone. "Do you know anything about this Yagi?" Drawing the number one hero out of his stupor, the man quickly responded. "If I'm to be honest, no idea. Nothing to this extent has ever happened to me before." Raising his eyebrows at the taller man, the mouse gave a small sniff. "What about the fight with Chainsaw? Or the Hateful Eight? They both took you down to your last legs a few times, just like with young Midoriya now. So, what do you mean?" Glancing down at the field, both men just sat there for a minute as they looked upon the smirking, battered form of Midoriya Izuku. All around his body, a thin veil of red and blue lightning crackled and sparked the air as his skin began to make marks and indentations very lightly on the flesh. And then there were his eyes. His pupils appeared small and almost empty amongst the much larger white layer of his sclera, but they were there and they were conducting sparks and strokes of lightning like a generator until his eyes were lost in feeds of blue and red. When I was fighting them, I was fighting to save people and to help people. At the minute Midoriya is finally being selfish, he is deciding to fight for himself and show his power. An almost villainous act in the eyes of some, but there is something else that is there within him. Something I just can't quite place, but trust me, it's there. Taking in a deep breath, Yagi turned to his successor once more. "And it will make him even stronger than I." In a dark, drab room in the middle of the city, a lone man sat in a room illuminated only by computer monitors and screens with his body hidden under layers of black and a hood. Idly, he was messing around with his fingers as he stared upon the forms of two boys on his screen, of a battle. Of the fight between Izuku Midoriya and Shuto Todoroki. And as he watched, he felt his face break out into an almost impossible grin. This was that boy from before, with the green hair that had threatened to stop his plans at the training center before All Might have showed up. This kid, Midoriya. Huh, looks like you got some skill, kid. Show me more. A few blocks away, the sound of a low TV rumbled through decrepit and blood-soaked walls as two figures stood before it, bathed in its bright light. One was a girl dressed in the outfit of a schoolgirl with her blonde hair tied in a strange and uneven way that left two strands dangling on either side of her face, of which held a pair of yellow eyes and sharp canine teeth with a bright red blush adorning her cheeks. The outfit was also stained in a fresh layer of blood. At the minute, she was sitting on the cut-up body of a man who no longer even looked human as she stared at the two people on TV with a lovesick expression on her face, directing her attention at one in particular. Behind her stood the form of a tall, slender man with mismatched pale skin with wrinkled purple flesh that looked sewn together alongside a messy head of black hair and black eyes. For his outfit, it consisted of an open black shirt with a white undershirt alongside black pants and trainers. He was currently staring at his partner with a confused expression. Toga, why are we watching this? Almost immediately the girl answered. The green-haired one is really cute and cut up, and I think he's going to get more bloody. We need to watch this, Dabi, we just need to. I need to see this cutie all bloody. Her words were dark and malicious yet in a sing-songy way that made her sound like a child. Instead of arguing with her, Dabi just sighed and focused his attention on the screen, intent on watching the action unfold. Hopefully this'll be worth something. Taking a step forward, Izuku just let his grin spread as he felt the bones painfully shift in his foot. Before him, Todoroki just sighed before turning to fully face him. Midoriya, you're hurt, you can't possibly continue. To this, Izuku laughed. Then with a narrowed gaze, he channeled one for all into his legs and leapt at the half-hot, half-cold Quirk user with extreme speed and power, followed by the loud crunch of bone as Izuku shot forward in the air. Rearing his fist back, he just roared in pain as he swung his power-imbued limb at the boy before him. Using his first instinct, Todoroki ducked just before he was hit, but that didn't stop Izuku from smashing his fist right into the ice wall to the right of him. In a brutal display of power and pain, Izuku roared out as his fist broke the entire wall in a single blow, sending out shockwaves of power that spread the shards all over the arena. Taking this moment, Todoroki shot backward and away from the green-haired boy as he shakenly stood up on his broken legs to examine his fist. It was clearly broken and badly damaged, with the skin being burnt and scratched around his fingers and knuckles, and around that very area blood was beginning to seep out through cracks in the skin, dripping onto the floor like a crimson waterfall. However, Izuku seemed to ignore it, instead opting to pull the digits back into place with his other hand, resulting in a harsh click to echo throughout the stadium. Shaking his head, Izuku's eyes were then back on Todoroki, and not a second passed before he leapt at him again, his legs cracking again as he launched forward. This time, Todoroki had no time to move, instead choosing to summon a wall of ice to at least slow the power-infused boy before him down. It didn't. Izuku just smashed through the icy pain like it was nothing, not stopping his assault on Todoroki, instead contacting the boy's stomach. With a powerful sweep, Izuku pushed all his power into his fist and skyrocketed Todoroki off into the distance, causing him to cut through the air with unmatched speeds before colliding with another one of his ice sculptures. Growling at the pain, Izuku just smashed his fist into his chest with a hearty grunt before lifting both of his arms into the air before quickly sweeping them down into an arc. With the speed generated, a massive gust of air like when he flicked his fingers was produced, but it was much wilder and crazed as it cut across the skies towards the downed Todoroki. Said boy was just fast enough to catch it, taking off into the air before it caught him. However, the edge got his foot as he was leaving, sending him into a spiral as the earth fell apart around him. Once again, Izuku was there, his eyes practically gone with the pain as another bout of loud cracking filled the air as he light his arms mid-jump and smashed them down into Todoroki's stomach, sending the boy careening quickly down into the smashed earth, breaking it even more. Just as fast, the green-haired boy was down at the floor as well, sliding under the bounced form of Todoroki before using his hands like a spring underneath his back to propel a twisting kick straight at the boy's spine. Howling in pain as he was once again sent into the air, Todoroki tried to combat the ever-aggressive Izuku. Throwing his hand to the floor, rows and rows of sharp icicles started to emerge from the floor as he flew, blocking off any path of entrance to his quickly escaping form. Spitting out blood as he watched the dual-colored boy fly off, Izuku quickly jumped back at him, smashing through the icicles with reckless abandon, not even caring. When they cut and bit into his flesh, finally catching up with the other boy, his body trying to stand from being kicked around like a ragdoll, he leapt at him again, foot first. Rearing it back, he swung at him, only narrowly missing his head as he ducked, but just like with his arms, a blade of air was generated, slicing into the ground behind him. Taking this as his moment to strike back, Todoroki grabbed Izuku's head before lighting his knee on fire and slamming his face into it with a roar, sending him bouncing up slightly before letting the opposite leg, which was infused with ice, collide with his side, which sent the boy spiraling a few meters away. Izuku wasn't down for long though. Flipping up backwards with his hands, another snap being generated, Izuku leapt back with his feet raised once more. He began to widely swing and swipe them to generate more and more blades to cut towards his foe. Gritting his teeth, Todoroki tried to avoid them, but a few nicked his exposed flesh and cut up the ground at his feet, making it hard to stand. Using this opportunity, Izuku ran forward and used Todoroki's head as springboard before slamming his body back down to earth like a comet. When he impacted, the world was thrown into disarray once more as pieces of land flew up into the sky, and so did Todoroki. Growling, the boy noticed that Izuku was resetting his bones again, groaning as he did so, and so he used this as a chance to end this fight. Preforming a roll, he quickly navigated the floating pieces until he got to Izuku before he slammed a fist of fire straight into his chest, causing a massive explosion of heat and flames to disperse all over the stadium. Enough! With that shout, he watched as a silhouette of Izuku went flying off into the fiery inferno that had engulfed the whole other half of the stadium. Stumbling back, he took in many deep breaths and he began to feel the effects of Izuku's attacks, a few broken ribs and bruised muscles. Thank God, his ice blocked most of the damage. Bending over, he just let the sounds of the stadium take over. However, he heard a noise from the fire. Almost immediately, all eyes were on the fire, and with a bated breath they watched as a figure began to emerge from the heat. Out of the flames walked out an Izuku with gritted teeth and a broken body with blood and sweat dripping down his form. The top part of his outfit had been torn and shredded, so much like the right side of Todoroki's outfit. He ripped it all off and threw it to the fire. Due to this, his rather built and lean form was exposed to the world, and despite the situation, many girls found themselves blushing at the display of hard muscle on display on this once scrawny boy. Strange and intriguing would be the word that they would describe it as. Not even taking note of their stares, Izuku just focused all attention on Todoroki before he started off into a gentle jog. Todoroki copied. This then morphed into a sprint from one side to the other. Todoroki copied again. This then finally climaxed into an all-out run to the center of the field for both contestants, with battle cries emerging from both of their throats before they leapt into the air and towards each other. However, Izuku didn't have his fist draw. Instead, a massive amount of crackling and build-up was emerging around his skull. Suddenly, everyone realized what he was doing. He was going to infuse his skull with his quirk and ram it into Todoroki. Roaring, Izuku took off from the ground with lightning speed that Todoroki had no time to combat it. Instead, he had to suffer as Izuku collided with him at a slightly lower angle, hitting his chest with his head and causing him to go flying back with shockwaves following his movements as he flew, and fluid fell out of his mouth. At the same time, Izuku began to feel the kickback and he too flew back in the opposite direction, hitting the ground sooner and then repeating an action of colliding with the earth before coming to a stop as Todoroki hit the earth as well. The stadium went quiet as they waited for either of them to move. They didn't. Izuku woke up coughing and spluttering. He could feel and taste the blood in his mouth, the copious amounts of spit and saliva that had accumulated over however long he had been unconscious as he heaved in and out air in a harsh and heavy attempt to recover any sense of feeling into his lungs, which also pained and shook as he coughed. And all this was bearing the shattered and sloshy movement that he felt in his head, It was like his skull was some sort of river carrying some sort of heavy fragment of earth downstream. In all aspects of his body, he just felt like complete sheet. After his coughing fit, he noticed his surroundings and his situation. The ringing in his ears was a clear and easy thing to notice for the teen, the piercing sound easily affecting his battered and bruised body. Then there was the constantly and clicking sounds his body made at any sort of small movement, whether they be shifting in his arms or legs or his chest. This was only exemplified when he attempted to lift his hands to his mouth to wipe away the few drops and slivers that escaped him in his outburst, only to hiss in pain as his bones creaked below his skin. It just hurt to hear it. As for where he was, he noticed it as a hospital or nurse's office, more specifically recovery girl's office. He'd been here enough times to know it off by heart by now. However, what surprised him was the lack of other patients. Usually there was at least one other person, even if they were just a student collecting supplies or recovering from a light headache that they would get rid of after 5 minutes, but today there was nothing. But there was still supplies and medicine out, so what was? In his haze and immediate feeling of regained awareness, he had forgotten about how he ended up in this state. The Yui games, that was what was happening. Laughing and then wincing at his silliness and then his pain, he began to remember what happened to him, and once again his memory hit him like a train. Or more specifically, like a one-for-all imbued fist straight to the face. And now was the time that he noticed his body was bound in thick layers of surgical cloth, another reminder of his ordeal. He had gone through another round of fighting with Todoroki and thus had fed up his body a whole lot more than he had in the first round, and even that was already extreme enough as it is. Broken fingers with rings of reddened skin, exposed knuckles that bled rivers of red, splintering flesh of his arms and legs that just held up with his attacks as to not force his bones straight out through the skin, and to top it all off, a broken skull that he had used as some sort of last-minute attack strategy that Izuku swore was due to him watching too many Quirk-related animes and cartoons. Bearing through with the pain, the green-haired boy reached up towards the back of his head to feel around from where he assumed a break would be, but what he felt was the curves and newly integrated grooves all over the bone. That one attack had completely splintered his skull. So how was he just not dead? It was something to do with your Quirk. Izuku couldn't help but let out a small yelp when an elderly voice burst through the ringing in his ears. Looking over to his right, he could only weakly smile at the sight of Recovery Girl, the woman holding an eerily strange mixture of anger and intrigue on her face. After a few seconds, Izuku managed to process her words. "Am I Quirk? What about it?" On the outside, he was shaky and nervous, just like he had all those overtimes before. Inside, however, he was panicking. How much did she know? Does she know about One for All? Does she know about... Before you ask, yes, I know about One for All. Does she have a mind-reading quirk? I'm actually a close friend of All Might's, so stop your worrying, Midoriya. She answered curtly and strictly, causing Izuku to effectively seize up all movement of his body as she began to walk over. Now, about this new development in your quirk. I assume that you have no idea what is happening to your body. He nodded. Of course you don't. She sighed. Well, considering your interest to All Might, I also assume that you know that he doesn't have this sort of ability? What do you mean by eye interest? I don't actually know if you think that you are being subtle, but kid, your costume looks like a really bad rip-off the man. It's not that hard to see. She now held an amused smirk on her face as Izuku began to deflate. Oh. Anyhow, you understand that All Might lacks this ability, right? Wait, what do you mean by a bill? If you let me continue without asking questions every sentence, then I might be able to tell you. Once again, he deflated. Now then, in your fight you seem to go into an unnaturally driven state of thought that ignored all sort of pain to push through to defeat Shudo. Am I correct? Recovery Girl was now sitting on a seat next to Izuku's bed. Well, not exactly. This captured her attention. As I was fighting, I could still feel the pain. Every time I moved it hurt, but all it did was motivate and push me forward to fight, like it was a really sick power-up or something. At the end, he began to mumble and mutter under his breath, his speech retreating into an unintelligible collection of words to Recovery Girl, but to her credit she wasn't really paying attention anymore. Instead, her attention was focused on the first part of the sentence. Ah, now that explains stuff a lot more then. Smirking when Izuku broke out of his mumbles to turn towards her, she picked up several papers from the desk and pushed them towards the boy. Taking this as a sign to pick them up, he did. On the paper was a picture of a skeleton, more specifically his own, and what he saw was honestly terrifying. There were two pictures, one of his muscles and one of his skeleton, and both featured shocking images of his broken and battered body after the use of One for All. They just looked like fragments, not even fully made-up structures anymore, but surprisingly, they looked less beat up than he had imagined. Just what had been going on. You know about how All Might can change between his two forms, correct? Well, that isn't something that all One for All users can do, it is just a side effect of the quirk due to his unique genes. And after some scans, and the information that you just revealed to me, I can confidently say that this looks to be your side effect to taking on One for All. And what exactly is my side effect? Well, I suppose that you thought that your body looked better than you thought, huh? So did I, but after some further analysis using some friends with specific quirks at the event, we noticed that when you went into this state, one we all nicknamed adrenaline, your body became more fluid and in tune with itself. This was all due to One for All. My friends don't know about the quirk, if you're worried. Anyway, from the scans I was sent, I could see faint threads of energy linking your bones together as well as large buildups around your ligaments. This was the side effect, Izuku. Confusion seemed to plague Izuku's face, inviting Recovery Girl to continue. When your body becomes victim of enough pain and stress, it goes into a state of fight or flight. It ultimately decides to go into fight. With this decision, One for All acts like a catalyst and support for your cells and nerves, muscles and bones, by linking them together under a collection of connections or buildups in case of your ligaments. By doing this, it allows more damage to be dealt to your bones before they completely break like before, forcing them together to become a stronger piece for the time that the ability is active, but it also allows your ligaments to have less strain due to the protection and support of One for All. Alongside this, the connections also mean that your cells can react better, and so they have stronger healing capabilities, meaning that you can go on for longer PRDS of time. In addition, any extra pain inflicted onto you, whether that be from your own body or an outside source, boosts these benefits and even increases your overall power output for a short amount of time. However, there is also a letdown PRD to this ability. She sighed after the long-winded explanation, before taking out another scan, one just after his collapse on the field by an X-ray. Immediately after the usage of adrenaline ends, your body shuts down for a while. The connections disappear and so do the benefits, leaving your body empty for a short time, about 30 seconds in this case, but that may increase with usage. Due to this, the healing stops and doesn't begin again for a while, which results in some complications. At this, she pointed to head, such as your skull. It was halfway through healing after your ridiculous stunt at the end of the fight when usage stopped abruptly. This left many marks and indents unhealed to the point where even I couldn't help, which now permanently has these grooves in it. Alongside this, your accelerated healing is not untouchable. It can and will shut down prematurely if you take too much damage. It can be beaten out of you. I'm sorry, Izuku. She finished her speech with a sympathetic look as he once again reached up to touch his damaged skull. So, that was the rundown of his new ability, huh? Adrenaline. A power which let him continue to fight through his pain and use it a power multiplier. Interesting. Dangerous. However, if he wanted to really be hero, he would have to use his quirk to his maximum potential despite his numerous drawbacks. Clenching his fist into his hair, he decided, "Thank you for the concern and the information, but if I really want to be a hero like All Might, I'll need to be able to take everything that is thrown at me." Looking Recovery Girl right in the eye, his eyes narrowed with determination. "And I made a promise to do just that." At first, the nurse just looked at him with such confusion and disbelief in her face that it almost looked like she didn't believe in him at all. But it was because he was taking this so well, no regret, no sorrow, just conviction to do his job even better next time. This wasn't the mindset of a teenage boy. This was the mindset of a hero. That's good to hear, Izuku. But you can't forget that you used your arms and legs a lot in that fight, so they weren't untouched, you know. Carefully, she leant over and began to unwind the wrappings on his arms. What Izuku saw made him flinch, but he had witnessed worse in his short time as a hero in training. On both of his arms were numerous cuts and bruises, scars that stabbed at and scarred his skin to the point where both of his hands appeared mildly deformed and misshapen. They would never be the same. Somehow, he could accept that. This is, different? That got a chuckle out of her. Now, not that I don't like this new attitude of yours, Izuku, but you need to remember that this ability doesn't make you invincible, then you will be hurt even more. Maybe even die. A heavy silence suddenly filled the air. Then I'll get stronger. Lifting his head, his eyes locked straight with the ceiling as a steadily growing smile crossed his features. I don't know how, but I'll do it. Maybe with some suit modifications or some sort of outside medical help. He quickly looked at her. But I will do it. Don't you worry. Once again, that same sense of conviction filled his tone, and somehow it soothed the worry in her chest. Patting his arm slowly, she quietly spoke to the boy. You'll make a great hero someday, Izuku. Getting off the chair, she began to walk towards the exit until Izuku remembered something. Hey, how was Todoroki? Oh, him? He was fine. However, you cost him his place in the finals, that's for sure. They had that red-haired idiot Kirishima replace him. There was a moment where Izuku said nothing, but he just sighed at his friend's well-being. And then, did you say that I cost him his place in the final? She nodded. How long have I been out for? 2 days. 2 days? Oh, I left a laptop on the table in case you want to see what you missed. And about releasing you, I'd say we can release you later today, barring any strenuous movement. Thank you. After she had left, Izuku cautiously reached over to grab the laptop. Clicking on a few things, he quickly navigated to the main homepage where a list of numerous trending topics and most searched results came up. He changed the settings to most recent. At the top of the search bar was a title that read, Winners of the UE Games? Clicking on it, he was taken to a page where the top 3 were revealed. As it turns out, Kirishima had taken the place of Todoroki, with the final matchups being with Bakugo going up against Ida, who apparently forfeited and then left the stadium entirely, and Kirishima versus Tokoyami, with the Shadow Quirk user winning the duel. In the description of the finale, which was Bakugo versus Tokoyami, it was stated that the Explosion Quirk user was distraught and angered at the fact that he wouldn't be fighting against the quoted, most powerful student in their whole FING grade, and as such began to copiously shout and scream and curse FNG Deku with his stupid FNG Quirk. This was shortly followed by a picture of the podium with Tokoyami and Kirishima offering the camera a neutral or overly toothy grin, whereas Bakugo looked to be restrained and tired up on the number 1 spot with a medal stuffed into his mouth. Izuku just sighed. He would be in for hell when he entered school tomorrow. The next option down was the tragic news that the hero Igenium had retired after an attack from the hero killer. Almost immediately, Izuku began to worry for Ida, the boy having told both him and Uraraka about his brother a while back. This must have been why he left the stadium. He mused quietly, feeling quite somber as he quickly looked for his phone, only to find nothing. Sighing, he decided to move on. A few trends went by with little progress, such as certain hero companies that are interested in the 3 winners of the UE Games and still very much intrigued by new powers of a certain half-cold, half-hot hero, which made Izuku happy that he hadn't screwed up Todoroki's chances too much. What surprised him though was the fact that he even saw his own name in one of the articles, citing his drive to win and excellent combat focus with keen strategy to be a winning factor as to why some companies might want to pick him up. That shocked him. Not as much as what was to come next, however. When the boy reached the 5th most trending topic, he felt his eyes bulge out of his skull and his body seize up. He was the 5th most searched topic. It simply read, Izuku Midoriya. That was his name. After getting over the shock, although that took a while, he hesitantly clicked on it. What followed was extreme feelings of pride as he read some of the articles which talked about how he was the highlight of the games to some people and how his powers would make him an excellent hero, to disappointment when he read about how some critics panned his reckless behavior and aggressive tactics made him unreliable. And then came what made him literally jump. Izuku Midoriya rated number 1 hottest guy of the Yui games. What? Plagued by his own intrigue, he clicked on it, only to find a broad and bold picture of his shirtless form during his fight with Todoroki to appear on screen with a brief description of his likable traits and qualities. Turns out, person who had written this attended Yui and had heard of Izuku before, per her notes, of which cited that he was nice and handsome with that sort of awkward personality that would make a girl coo and scream in awe at, while his personality was still tough enough that he could protect you and make you feel safe. Also, his muscles were such a nice set that it put some modern bodybuilders to shame with their attractiveness. It was fair to say that Izuku was so red and so deep into his covers due to the compliments that he was sure that he was going to pass out again. After that, it was just a link into the rabbit hole of Izuku's newfound fame. The article after that was talking about Izuku and how he could be of use to certain bigger hero companies, as well as talking about his similarities to famous heroes like All Might. A compliment like that made his heart soar with pride. He was compared to the All Might. Then he was plunged back into a sea of embarrassment when the next article once again talked about his attractiveness and strife compared against not only other members in his class, but also other famous heroes. That got Izuku dizzy and floored. However, was an interview with several heroes after the event, where both MT Lady and Ectoplasm commented on his fight as being a highlight, with himself being singled out. He even got called cute by MT Lady. Leaning back, Izuku could only huff in disbelief at his new position. Looked like he had a following. Sitting around a table at the school, the girls of Class 1A sat talking. More specifically about the Yui games that had taken place 2 days earlier. So, did you guys get anyone coming up to talk to you about the games? Mina asked with a wide grin and confident exterior that told the rest of the group what had happened to her. Yes, I did. Unfortunately, most of it was just to comment on my looks in a cheerleading outfit, or to ask me out rather than my skills, unfortunately. Momo relented to the group, sighing in disappointment as she crossed her arms and leant back in her chair. At least some people talked to you. I didn't get talked to once. The whole group momentarily jumped at the sound of the energetic and high-pitched voice before they centered their attention on a seemingly empty chair. Toru, maybe it was because they didn't see you. Tsuyu Azui, with her intellectual and straightforward comments as always. Ooh, was the response. Anyway, I got talked to like twice, I think? Still cool though, huh? Jairu stated, her jacks once again tied around her fingers idly as she spoke. For a while, they all waited for the other member of their group to comment, only to get silence. Turning their heads to the side, they all centered in on one, quiet and turned-in member of their audience. Yururika? Did anyone talk to you? Finally taking note of her friends, the southern girl shot her head up quickly to see the rest of them staring at her, causing a faint red blush to dawn her already rosy cheeks. Echa? Oh yeah, I got talked to. She quietly murmured before returning her eyes to her lap. The rest of the girls knew what she was thinking about. You still worrying about Izuku? As a stark contrast to her actions a few moments ago, Yururika's head shot up almost immediately with an even redder face than before. What are you talking about? The rest could only chuckle at the shameless display of affection. You don't have to be like that, we all get worried about our friends. Mina answered with a smug grin adorning her pink skin. Yururika responded to the taunt with silence. Speaking of Izuku, who would have thought that he had it in him? Toru spoke up, the usual enthusiasm gone from her voice in place of admiration and concern for her classmate. What, have it in him to go through so much pain and anger to win the fight? Momo asked, looking towards the invisible girl's general direction. Or the fact that he got that set of muscles? Now everyone had red faces because of a topic that no one had really talked about, being bought up by the ever-enthusiastic Tsu. Well, there is that aspect of it, but mostly that change that he had when he went down. With a small giggle, the pink-skinned girl of the group elaborated for the rest of them. Yeah, like before he did all this stuff with his fingers to attack, but that whole thing was something else entirely. Jairu stated, but now she was looking down at her phone, typing something away on the keyboard. More like someone else. Uraraka's quiet voice hit the rest of the group like a ton of bricks. In her voice, there was so many different tones were showing through. Are you all right? Cautiously, Mina started to speak up, but before she could answer, Jairu's voice shot through. Holy shit! Quickly shoving her phone into the middle of the table, everyone felt their eyes bulge as they looked upon the information presented to them. Before them sat the name of their classmate at number 5 on the trending list. A thing. A seemingly invisible gust of wind turned the phone around at a 90-degree angle, showing the information to Toru a bit better. I wonder what it says. Reaching a hand over cautiously, Mina quickly touched the screen, and after a few seconds of tension, it appeared to what? Izuku Midoriya rated number 1 hottest guy of the Yui games. Alongside that, a picture of Todoroki and Izuku's fight appeared, more specifically an image of when Izuku ripped off his shirt. Well, at least we have something to compare to, instead of going to our memories. Following up her action, Mina started to giggle nervously as a thin veil of lilac dusted her flesh. This was shortly followed by the creasing and moving of clothes awkwardly to give Toru's answer. Everyone had relatively the same reaction, but Uraraka. She just sorts of froze while staring at the picture, everything but the blood flow to her cheeks, that is. This trance was only broken when the bell signaling the start of form chimed, causing all the girls to look at each other before quickly moving to their seats just as awkwardly as other people began to walk in. Today was going to be weird. In a dark room, Dabi was trying to focus on reading up on some of the latest villain-based events. After glancing through them, it always came back to one group, the League of Villains. Smirking, he leant back in his seat as he thought of how superior Stain was in every aspect. His dedication, his reasoning, his execution, his tap. Shaking his head, Dabi continued with his train of thought. Flipping back a few pages in his notes, he noted that the League tried to attack Yui a few weeks back with some sort of pre-made creature with a multitude of different quirks that could supposedly go up against All Might himself. And somehow they failed. They failed with a creature that could potentially beat All Might. These guys were pathetic, useless, so bad as villains that tap. Gritting his teeth, the villain slowly turned his head to see the tiny form of Toga curled up on a comfy chair in the corner of the room, only her face being illuminated by her phone. And somehow, that sickly lovesick expression was still proudly displayed on her face that still somehow made Dabi do a double take after all this time with her. Toga, do you mind? I'm trying to do some dash. Tap. Rolling his tongue around his mouth, he looked at the wall for a few moments before abruptly standing up and walking over to the blonde with an annoyed look dotting his scratched-up face. When he finally reached her, he stood behind her bag as he tried to see what was on her phone. It was that boy from Yui, the green-haired kid who F'd himself up. Toga. Finally, he caught her attention, getting the girl to turn around to look up at his face, obscured as it was by the darkened room. After meeting his eye, her face formed into one of unnatural annoyance, one that looked very out of place on her face. What do you want? Even her voice sounded annoyed. The one that Dabi had never seen deviate from lovesick and childlike was now filled with malice. So essentially, she was pretty invested in what she was doing. I just wanted to tell you that I'm trying to do some work, so can you keep you? He paused, glancing over her to see that she was currently stuck on a picture of the boy in a shirtless state, with numerous cuts and marks staining his body. Creeping to a minimum while I do so. As quick as the words flew out of his mouth, she turned back to her own work, quietly shooing the Fire Quirk user away with a small, yeah. To this, he happily did just that. As she looked forwards, Toga began to lose herself in the boy's eyes once more. At first, she was just intrigued by his scars, by his cuts, by his battle damage that had been dealt by his own quirk. That was the start. Then she started to look up more about him. First it was his name, then his age, then it was what people thought his quirk was, then it was videos of his fight, and before she knew it, she was looking at his pictures and was no longer interested in his cuts. but his eyes. In all the pictures, the videos, she saw that the green orbs had something lacking in them, had something missing that would make a person whole. Like her. Quietly, she began to slide the side of her phone, biting her lip as she did so. Izuku was cute as well, even without the cuts, but the fact that his quirk seemingly relied on pain only increased his attraction in her eyes. Plus, who doesn't love a forbidden romance? Smiling brightly, she felt her body shudder as her biting managed to draw out a few drops of crimson onto her tongue. Toga was determined to make Izuku bleed for her. Watching as the world passed him, Izuku suddenly felt insignificant. Despite his feats in the last 3 days, staring out this window at all the cars shoot by, at all the people nonchalantly walk by, at all the birds and the trees and just life in general just continue living and moving without any care about his own well-being. The world was still turning without him. And he was okay with that. In all honesty, he had always sort of realized that he was pretty much nothing in the world, especially having grown up without a quirk, which only further put him down into a pit of seeming worthlessness. But he found that the newfound fame that he had acquired from the games had just put all this into retrospect for him. But then again, that was why he needed to be a great hero. To make sure that he meant something to the world, to make sure that he could save people and places in the world, to make sure that he could use his newfound quirk to be a symbol of something great that could be looked upon and inspire others for years to come. Glancing down at his hands, gazing upon the bumps and cuts that adorned his flesh, he suddenly remembered that that was all of what One for All was about: legacy. Izuku was already a part of something larger than himself, and to live up to that responsibility, he would have to use all the power he was given, no matter what the world threw at him. No matter the cost. Shaking his head, Izuku pushed his body away the window ledge, letting momentum carry his body further back into the hospital ward and towards a small collection of clothes that lay on his bed. Currently, he was dressed in a state of dress that could be considered complete to some, but to Izuku it just felt off on his person. The Yui standard blazer had been abandoned on the bed, and his normally tucked-in shirt was left free to the world while his red tie was left hanging around his neck lazily, with only his trademark red trainers and standard issue pants being part of the norm for the boy. However, he was told by Recovery Girl a few minutes ago to keep his outfit like this due to the nature of numerous bandages that had been reapplied before putting the clothing on, and that any other extra layers would simply make him uncomfortable. Sighing, he spun around to pick up his blazer and bag, ready to get back to his class after 2 days of absence, when he was suddenly sent backwards by an unknown force. Stumbling back a few feet, Izuku let his body reassert itself and let the blurriness of his vision vanish before looking at what knocked him over, only to come face to face with a literal wall of muscle. "Young Midoriya, I have come to see you." Involuntarily flinching at the harsh-sounding tone and volume of All Might's voice as it let loose, bounding around the free space inside the relatively empty hospital ward, Izuku tried to right himself quickly before the man. "Gee, good morning, All Might. How was your dita?" Before he could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by the sound of blood hitting the floor, accompanied by a large plume of smoke that rose before him. Sighing slightly, Izuku readied himself for the lanky skeletal form of All Might to emerge. Donned in a baggy shirt and tie, Toshinori Yagi lazily stood before him as blood sank between his lips. "Hey kid, how've you been?" The older man offered with a smile, rubbing away the crimson that began to drip down his chin. Smiling, Izuku stood back up and rubbed the back of his head, unintentionally running his fingers over the newly made grooves and juts in his skull. "Emmy? Oh, I've been fine." Chuckling slightly, Yagi placed a hand on the green-haired boy's shoulder with a smirk. "Oh, just fine, hey? I think that becoming an internet trend would have made you a little better than fine, hey Midoriya?" With unmatched speeds, Izuku's eyes shot open, and with a face dusted over by scarlet, he began to mutter and stumble over his words incoherently as his arms shook and started to blur before Yagi's eyes. "And no, that's not the CC case at all. I..." Chuckling at the young boy's actions, Yagi just stood back and motioned Izuku to sit onto the bed, which he did. "I was just joking, kid, don't worry. No, I'm here to talk to you about your side effect." The green-haired boy shot up, and he seemed to lock eyes with the seemingly sunken eyes of All Might, the blue masses glowing with intent and worry. What about it? Well, I just wanted to know how you feel about it. Shrugging, Yagi just gestured towards the wall where several pictures of Izuku's body was located, all of them broken and battered. Somehow, just looking at his form, the new successor could tell that somehow the man felt responsible for this. It's difficult, well, sort of difficult. Difficult to grasp the situation, I guess. Shuffling around on the bed, he molded his fingers into the grooves into his hands to calm his nerves. It's just that I've always been picked on for being quirkless, and I guess I just learned to accept pain, learned to deal with being knocked down. So, to have this new power forced onto me that relies completely on my willingness to accept my pain is just. Once again, he found himself over his words, but now it was due to the unnatural way that Yagi just stood still and barely moved a muscle as he told him his story. Listen, Midoriya, I know all about the ins and outs of your new adrenaline power, and so I just wanted to say that you should focus on honing one for all instead of adrenaline for the time being. Silence. It wasn't a horrible ask, a thing that would go completely against logic. If he wanted to grow stronger, then he should probably train with the quirk that he held already instead of investing himself into a whole new power that he just received. But even Izuku knew that he could hone both skills at once, using them in tandem with each other, so was all might be asking him to only use one? All I'm saying is that one for all is a difficult power to harness, especially if you want to be able to use it without it breaking your body. And then there was the little things that Izuku could tell. How Yagi was being very nonchalant about the situation when previously he was very thorough in his concern, or how he was trying to avoid Izuku's stare always. All might? And it makes sense for me to try and practice both at the same time. Yagi froze. I suppose you could do that. Scratching his own head, the skeletal man chuckled nervously before sighing. All right, listen, Midoriya. Out of all of the previous one for all users, your side effect is the most dangerous. I didn't mention the whole idea of side effects before because I had no clue as to what yours would be, and I didn't want you to obsess over the different possibilities, like you have done with other endeavors. He smiled. However, like I said, yours is the most dangerous of them all. So, if you are going to train it, please be cautious and make sure to... I know. Surprising both figures, Izuku spoke up with clenched fists. I understand your concern, and I wholeheartedly thank you for every opportunity that you have given me, but now I have something to call my own. My own quirk, that is completely my own, and to make sure that I don't rely on you constantly, I need to train with it. I need to hone any skill that I have, no matter the cost, no matter the difficulties. When I was younger, I would have given the world for a quirk like this, so I must train hard to give everything given to me back. Looking up, he locked eyes with Yagi once more. And that starts with you and your quirk. Izuku. Ring ring. Looking up, both figures noted that the bell signaling the beginning of class had begun. Yagi was about to respond again, but he was interrupted by another voice. Oh, it's Nori. I need to give Izuku one last look over before he goes on his way, so if you mind. Quietly stepping into the room, Recovery Girl made her presence very clear. Giving one last look towards Izuku, All Might just muttered. Why sure. Remember, young Midoriya, that you shouldn't always have to be the one in pain to relieve others of it. Patting him on the shoulder, he promptly left, leaving Izuku with some thinking to do. After a short while, Recovery Girl gave Izuku a sympathetic look before going through with his checkup. And now, Izuku's feet felt weighted and heavy as he strode through the barren halls of youth. His heavy footsteps seemed to bounce right off the walls and strike his form with an unparalleled amount of force, forcing him to constantly be shaking his head to will the sense of unease and worry that had begun to shroud his mind. He also had some bandages wrapped tightly around his head, arms and chest that Recovery Girl had reapplied to the point where they were just constricting enough that he could resort to thinking about the pieces of cloth instead of the crushing realization that had come about in the last few hours. Idly wrapping and unwrapping the bandages around his deformed and messed up visages of flesh, the green-haired boy allowed his mind to go back to a few moments ago, to the point where he began to feel this intense amount of burden and pressure. Thinking back on what he just witnessed at the medical bay, Izuku just walked up to a nearby wall, the shine present in the pristine white material before the boy let his head collide with the construct as an attempt to clear his mind. It didn't. Instead, a sharp jolt of pain fluttered through Izuku's body, causing his eyes to burst open and his misshapen fists to fold in on themselves into some sort of fighting stance. Somehow, he could also feel the heat of his skin, how it skyrocketed for a short moment against the cool and cold material of the wall before it all went back down. It was like coming down from a high. It was just exhausting. During the checkup, Recovery Girl learned that his body had become more responsive to pain with the new side effect of One for All pushing the idea of fight whenever any sort of pain shook his body. A semblance of pain wouldn't activate One for All though, and for adrenaline to activate he needed to reach a certain threshold of pain, of which he hadn't discovered yet, but his body would prepare itself for the quirk's use just like now. His body would attempt to get into a fighting stance subconsciously and his skin would begin to heat up like when the quirk was used. It was strange development, just like this whole scenario, but the very idea that his body was wanting him to fight was something that concerned him the most. It wasn't like he liked the feeling of pain. But if he was going to be a truly great hero, he would just have to get used to it. Or learn to like the feeling. Biting his tongue, Izuku backed away from the wall, smirking slightly at the collection of condensation left on the wall from his sudden leap in body heat before turning on his heels and calmly moving down the corridor to his homeroom. Finally, he made it to the door. Taking a deep breath, he tried to open the door as quietly as he could, as to not to draw attention to himself. Fate was a cruel beach, however. Instead of opening it quietly, it not only made the loudest squeaking noise that Izuku had ever heard, but the sheer size of the thing gave him away almost immediately. Cringing at the noise and how every single tone of voice that he could faintly hear outside of the room went cold and silent, Izuku just awkwardly wandered into the room with both his eyes closed. He got into the room and slowly opened his eyes to see what the class was like. Before him stood a dazed and confused class, all of which held expressions of surprise at his sudden appearance, and two teachers, Aizawa and Midnight, who looked at him with amusement. Glancing back towards his classmates, he offered a small wave in the door frame. "Hi-du." Surprising the teen the most out of anyone in the room, Izuku barely had time to react as Yururika leapt at him from her chair, colliding hard with his chest to the point where he almost fell over backwards as he used the door frame to help stabilize himself. After recovering, he felt his whole body light up, not only from the slight jolt of pain that he felt when the southern girl hit his already injured chest, but also at the fact that Yururika was hugging him. Yururika was hugging him. He just froze, unable to even complete the hug, and he just held his arms slightly behind her back in fear of doing something wrong as she just held onto him tighter. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see some of his classmates giggling at the show while some, most prominently Mineta, stood open-mouthed at the display. Hell, even Midnight was laughing at his expense. After a while, he sort of just muffled down a few words to the shorter girl. "Hi. You're an idiot, you know that?" Wincing at the amount of pain and anger in her voice, he tried to quickly come up with something to retort the statement, but instead it just came off as a quiet mess of jumbled mumbles that he was commonly known for. It got her to laugh though, so he didn't feel too bad. After a while, she let go, and when he finally got to look at her face, he could help but just think how beautiful she looked. Her cheeks, which were usually rosy anyway, held a rich tint of red, and her eyes were closed with the few hints of tears present in the corners alongside a beaming smile that he couldn't help but follow suit with his own small smile. Ahem. A rough cough caught Izuku's attention, and both his and Yururika's gaze fell onto Aizawa, the man grinning one of his sickly smiles at the pair. At this, the southern girl took that as her cue to go back to her seat while trying to ignore the poking and prodding of her friends as she went. Meanwhile, Izuku wandered up to the man, wanting to know what the heck they were doing in class. "It's nice to have you back, Midoriya, and to know that you're actually alive after that stunt you pulled," the eraser quirk user quickly stated, leaving the green-haired boy to only awkwardly chuckle at his stupidity. "A diamond headbutt? Well, we just started a few minutes ago, so I'll have Midnight explain what you're doing." Sinking back into his sleeping bag, Izuku then turned to the 18+ rated hero herself, with the woman offering a strange, sadistic smile. "Hello, Izuku. You put up a good fight at the games, maybe a little too good for your own well-being but a good fight nevertheless. Say, I heard that your quirk, or at least your new thing relies on pain. She liked her lips at the boy, sending a strange shiver down his spine. If that's true, do you think that you can demonstrate it later? Behind him, Izuku heard the quiet murmurs of a jealous Mineta and Kaminari as he tried to quickly get himself out of this strange situation. I don't think that W would be very good right now. He opted to look down at the floor. Don't worry, I'm only teasing. Well, the others have just been working on their hero names. At the sound of that, Izuku's head shot back up with a certain childlike look of wonder in his eyes. We'll be revealing them to the class in about 10 minutes, so go ahead and think of them. She offered him a whiteboard, a pen before telling him to go sit down. Twisting on his heels, the teen tried to avoid all forms of eyesight from everyone in the class. However, he got his eyes caught on one person, Bakugo. The angry teen was glaring at him with such intensity and anger that Izuku felt like he had killed the boy's family, but he knew that it was completely due to how he injured Todoroki in the games. Or about how he was an internet trend. His entire class, no, probably the entire school had seen that on the internet by now. Sighing, he quickly caught a glimpse of Todoroki after Bakugo huffed and turned away from him. After giving the boy a small nod, to which he got the same in return, he noted to himself to talk to the boy after the lesson. And so, the lesson went by for a few minutes, with thousands of possibilities swimming around Izuku's head. Since he was younger, he had thought of so many names that revolved around his idol, around All Might Jr., Super Might, All Man. He had thought of it all. But now that he had the man's power flowing through him as well as the fact that this new power was completely his own, he felt as though taking his name was something wrong. So instead, he began to brainstorm new ideas revolving around pain, regeneration, about getting back up after being knocked down no matter what. After a while, people started to come up and present their names. The first up was Aoyama, the prestigious and fancy-looking boy, deciding to present his name like it was some sort of super serious presentation. All around him, Izuku heard criticism about the performance, but the teen decided to wait until his name was revealed to criticize. That was quickly thrown out the window when the name was revealed. I can't stop twinkling. Is that even legal? Could a hero name be the equivalent to a short sentence? Surprisingly, Midnight accepted it, leaving everyone dazed and confused at what actually constituted as a name. Next up was Mina, who strode with her usual confidence and cockiness. Her hero name came down to being the heroine of Ridley Alien Queen. Subsequently, it was shot down, but Izuku couldn't help but feel bad for her when it was shot down. It actually sorts a fit idea that the pink-skinned girl had been going for this whole time pretty well. On her way back, the two had met eyes and he had noticed that she had waved at him, with a light dust of lilac of her cheeks. Whatever the hell that was about, Izuku wouldn't know. Then came a stream of names after a rather good one from Tsuyu with Froppy, the heroine that kicks off the rainy season, which cemented the clean and friendly aesthetic that the frog quirk user was commonly associated. This was followed by Kirishima's name, Red Riot, which was actually based off of the old hero Crimson Riot, so it was actually a really cool naming idea which actually had Izuku considering the All Might idea for a split second before going back to more logical and grounded names. After that came another long list of names, ranging from the really good such as Anima, or Charge Bolt, and Kriya, to more, well, unique names like Earphone Jack and Shudo. After being told to change his from Baron of Explodo Kills, Bakugo sat back down and Izuku soon realized that it was only him and Ida left. In his head, he had gone through a whole list of interesting and cool names based around his quirk, but none of them affected him like he thought they would. He thought that he would feel empowered and strengthened by the name, while still being able to use it as thing of empowerment for other people, but all of them just sounded off to his ears. Then Ida chose his name of Tenya, and it was all down to Izuku. And it hit him. The name that meant so much to him, in both a negative and a positive way, that practically had driven the path of his life since preschool. A name that could be paired with his themes and ideas around his quirk. A name that could empower Izuku in the darkest times yet still sound powerful. a name that stood for just as much as the teen stood for himself. Standing up, Izuku proudly walked up to the front of the class with his name in hand. When he finally presented it, it got many different reactions from around the room: shock, confusion, laughter, all of them came towards him. Even Midnight didn't sound confident in his choice. Are you sure that you are okay with that, Midoriya? Clenching his fist around the board, he spoke with no hesitation in his voice. Yeah. Up until now, I've never really liked the name. It stood for me being weak and powerless and being able to be pushed down easily. But recently, someone changed the meaning of the word for me and blew my world wide open. I was so happy to be finally recognized and have the word changed. It stands for getting back up, even after being beaten down so many times. Glancing up, he quickly caught sight of two people in particular, Uraraka and Bakugo. The former had a look of pride and happiness of her face as she smiled at him, while the latter was angry and inflamed as he glared at him. But for the first time, Izuku didn't care. Looking back at his board, he smiled at what was written in bold writing. Deku. Idly, Izuku began to trace the scars on his hands underneath their linen wrappings. Watching with an intense gaze as his fingers smoothed over the creases in the bandages, patting them to his skin until he felt the jagged patch of raised flesh, hardened and cool against his normally hot body. It was soothing somehow to know that his efforts would always be with him, that he could just look down and remember both his power, his strength, his strife and his weakness, his downfall, his fragility with a few scratches. Somehow it filled him with a tiny amount of glee. Interlocking his fingers and pulling, he let the loud, cracking sound shoot out into the environment before Izuku looked around the environment. Dragging his field of vision around the classroom, he noted that they were still on the English question that they were on a few minutes ago, when he had first started playing with his hands, and that most the class was still working on their question. It was some simple translation, nothing too difficult for Izuku, so he had just been daydreaming for a while, letting his mind escape and recap what had been happening to him recently. Present Mike was quiet for once, allowing him to think clearly, and the only sounds surrounding him were the little grumbles of Bakugo alongside the tapping of pencils against the desks, which helped the rhythm in his head a surprising amount. Gazing across the sea of seats once more, his eyes caught onto the sharp gaze of Tsuyu Ajui, who was staring at him with a certain level of seriousness and concentration that the green-haired boy swore he could see lightning shooting towards his face. Tilting his head, he quirked an eyebrow in her direction, hoping that she could see it and subtly tell him what was wrong. Instead, when she saw his confusion, she simply blinked once, smirked, wrote something down on a ball of paper and threw it at him. Due to him being a row behind her, it wasn't that hard for him to catch. Unwrapping it, he leaned forward a bit to try and see what the frog quirk user had written, her scraggly writing hard to read. Eventually, however, he got it. Just trying to figure out where all the muscle goes. Like a pandemic of red across his whole form, Izuku recoiled at the comment with his chair following his movements, resulting in a sick screech. Glancing down, he noted how his body had gotten back into its messing with bandages mode, where his arms were bent and subconsciously flexing, straining the material of his shirt slightly. With a quiet, jumbled stutter, he looked up to see the triumphant and smirking face of Ajui, her tongue out of her mouth in a sort of mocking fashion before returning to her work. Meanwhile, Izuku just found himself rooted to the spot by his own body's lack of movement as he tried to figure out what to do. In fact, now that he thought about it, a bunch of people had been acting weird around him today. It was only one PRD before lunch, meaning that they had had 3 PRDS before this, and during that time he noted himself being stared at a bunch, by both males and females alike. First, in homeroom, it was Mina and Uraraka who both turned away as soon as he clocked them. Then it was maths, and during that he noticed Ida examining his hands as he sat next to him while also asking him about his condition, which wasn't actually that out of the norm, but he also saw the stare of Kirishima, Kaminari and Mineta as they talked in the corner of the room, with 2 of the group glaring at him for some unknown reason while the other just looked perplexed and confused. Finally, there was modern literature with Cementos, in which he caught sight of Uraraka once again, this time alongside Jairu and Momo, the latter 2 not hiding their appearance when they noticed his presence. And now there was Ajui. What was with everyone today? However, a quick refresh of his memory alongside the message on Ajui's note told him everything in a matter of seconds, his fight with Todoroki and all the repercussions that had come about from it. Pulling his hand to his face, he roughly sighed into it, relishing at the movement of the soft linen on his skin as he began to reminisce about sad event. How it had put him in this state. He could only think about how the train ride home was going to be, or even how lunch was going to be in a few minutes. Glancing back down to his books, he took note of the small notebook that he had acquired from Recovery Girl before he left. He picked it up. Inside, it held a vast number of ideas and tasks that he had appointed for himself. There was the long list of alternative hero names that he had thought of during homeroom, several medicine names provided to him that would help with pain if he felt any, and then a longer list of new discoveries about adrenaline. Humming to himself, Izuku smiled at his notes before quirking an eyebrow once more at what lay on the next page. New costume ideas. Ever since the discovery of his new side effect, he had been pondering about what changes to make to his costume. Yes, he still had one for all and as a result still was part of All Might's quirk, so the change wasn't needed, but the idea of having something else of his own just spoke out to him and made him feel some small sense of glee at having come up with some ideas. Also, he was thinking of ways to deal with his bone-breaking problem, how to make sure it didn't affect his body too much even during the small healing boost he got from using adrenaline. He had thought of a simple arm brace, one that would trail down from his more easily damageable ligaments, but he then relented, arguing that this could limit movement and that he could simply rip it off during his weird, devil-may-care phase scene in his fight with Todoroki. Then, it was grips that attached to his elbows, but the same problems arose. Sighing once again, he leaned back into his chair, thinking of how to even customize his costume. After all, he didn't know anyone that could effectively alter it. But yes, he did. Leaning up, he began to think back to the games, to the round with the headbands and how him, Yuruka, Tokoyami and Mei had gotten into the next round. Going back on his knowledge, he could recall that was in Class 1H and had a quirk that let her eyes zoom in and out to allow her to see better. However, what he was most focused on was the fact that she used machines and mechanical properties in her suit and gadgets to help her through the competition. If there was someone that could help him out with his costume, it was her. Going through his head, he recalled her telling him that she usually hung out with Power Loader at the workshop they had on school grounds and they had lunch next so he could visit her then. Nodding to himself, he spent the last 2 minutes just staring at the clock, all the while trying to ignore the feeling of eyes running up and down his body. Ring ring. Letting out an involuntary sigh, he watched as the rest of the class stood up and stretched from their translations before turning to their friends to begin casual conversation that was always around during lunch. Present Mike gave a quick notice to place the papers on his desk if you were leaving, which everyone practically was. Following suit, Izuku stood up and made his way to the door, giving his teacher a quick goodbye as he did. Now in the hallway, he suddenly found himself very lost. Where was the workshop? Freezing in place directly outside the room, he started to focus on trying to figure out where it was leading to his habit of mumbling under his breath to come back, causing the few students that were left to turn to him in confusion. Izuku? You all right? At the sound of his name, the boy's head shot up to meet the eyes of Mina, a sense of daze and amusement in her tone as she looked upon him. Also, judging by the floating mess of clothes standing next to her, he quickly deduced that Toru was with her. Emmy? Oh yeah, I'm good, just trying to figure out where the workshop is. Standing back up from his hunched position, he placed his hands on the back of his head, smoothing his hands over his cracked head again, causing him to grit his teeth when he did so. However, he did miss the subtle shift in the yellow iris of Mina as she glanced at his curled arm with a smirk. The workshop? Why do you need to go there, Izuku? Turning to his side, he quickly noted that now Toru was speaking, her softer voice feeling quite close to his ear. And as it turns out, she had moved from her spot next to Mina and was now standing next to him, her skirt swishing alongside her blazer's sleeves. I need to upgrade my costume. My new thing doesn't really work with my old suit. He replied sheepishly, letting a thin veil of red dust his cheeks as he spoke, subconsciously turning away from the invisible girl. Oh yeah, we haven't asked you, have we? Mina spoke up, turning to Toru as she did. Ask what? Yeah, about that super cool, awesome thing that he did at the games. What was it, Izuku? Why did you suddenly go all I'm such a badass, huh? Quickly forgetting her confusion, the invisible girl quickly shuffled back to the front of him and began to jump up and down before him, causing her clothing to begin to fly and jostle. It would take some time for me to go through it all. Trying to ignore the slight jab at his not badassness, he chuckled slightly. Oh, well, I know where the workshop is, so I can take you there while you explain your new thing to us, alright? Skin Girl next to the duo quickly spoke up once more, excitement about his new side effect leaking through her words. Thinking it through, Izuku quickly agreed to go through his new side effect, making up a cover that it was just some new aspect of a regular strength quirk so that he wouldn't reveal anything about one for all on accident. As they were walking, with the only boy in the trio making his over-the-top hand signs and arm waving as he went through the new abilities he had procured, he found out that the girls were actually really interested in the topic, more so than he actually had previously thought of. Over the last term, Izuku hadn't really spoken to them much, instead choosing to stick with Ida and Uraraka for much of it as that was generally what was easiest for him, but on the few occasions that he found himself enjoying their company. Like right now. They were completely different from him. Both were some of the most extroverted and out there people he had seen in his whole life, and that was pretty hard to do with the ever-evolving world of quirks and the like, while he was one of the surest kids in the whole class with a quirk that he couldn't even use properly. Plus, the fact that he looked like he had been copied and pasted from a very plain background from an anime didn't help, while both Mina and Toru stood out from the crowd in their own way, whether that be with the bright color of their body or their lack of a body. They were just so different to him that he felt sort of entranced when they talked and spoke to him. They were giving him an insight into life that he definitely couldn't be a part of in his current state. So, your power practically relies on you beating yourself up to get a power-up? That's harsh, man, like real hardcore. Mina quietly quipped as they walked, whistling to herself at the end after Izuku had finished his explanation. One thing that he had noticed about Mina was her broken-up use of language and slang, which was something that he really didn't experience a lot, but it was a nice break from his usual stutter-why nonsense. Why, yeah, pretty much. He laughed along with her as he thought about her words, how it was probably the tamest way that it could be described without being painful. Wow. You're really cool now then, huh? Toru spoke up once again, reminding Izuku of her presence. I wouldn't say that. Oh, come on, man. You're super cool now. You got this awesome quirk that absolutely rocks, you've got this real sweet personality, and not to mention your muscles. You are so cool, Izuku, and don't you forget it. Leaping before him, Mina began to act like some sort of army drill sergeant about being cool, waving her hands in front of Izuku's face alongside the raising of her voice made the boy go bright red. Well, that and the fact that she mentioned his muscles. WWLII. Oh yeah, you have all these muscles, don't ya? Where the hell have you been hiding these all this time, huh, Izuku? Now it was Toru's turn to have a go at him, her swaying clothes stopping abruptly to poke her finger into his upper pectorals, prodding them as if to test that they were actually real with a tone of voice that sounded genuinely offended at the fact that he hadn't ripped off his shirt and told the whole demon class about his muscles. And somehow, all of this just made Izuku melt into a tsunami of red blushes and stuttering as he tried to find a way out of this situation. However, fate seemed to smile on him as the two girls began to giggle at his incompetence. Ah well, here we are, muscles, the workshop. Pausing in her stride, Mina gestured to large two-doored room to their left where a lot of noise seemed to be accumulating from the inside. Funny how he didn't notice it earlier. Ignoring his previous embarrassment, he turned to the two. Thanks for showing me here, it means a lot. They both shrugged him off. Nah, it was no biggie really. The pink-skinned girl retorted, crossing her arms under her bust. We're happy to help. The invisible girl added, her clothes swaying once more. Seriously though, thank? Oh yeah, you ain't too worried if we tell everyone about your quirk's new shtick, right? Thanks. Bye. Before he could even respond, he noted that the two had run off to the cafeteria, giggling the whole way there. Slumping over, Izuku sighed as he knew that he was going to be getting a bunch of questions during the hero activity that they had last PR'd. Cautiously, he wandered over to the doors. Judging from all the noise of machines and tools from inside, he knew that the girls had actually taken him to the workshop and not just some random place of the school to make fun of his incapability to socialize. Walking up, he was about to knock on the door when suddenly, all the previously erupting from the room stopped abruptly. Quirking an eyebrow, he was about to open the door to check what was up. What the? Boom. In about 5 seconds, Izuku realized that he had been thrown clean across the corridor by some unknown force, landing flat on his butt with a thud. His ears were ringing too, a loud piercing sound that he could help but wince from a newfound weight that covered his body. From his squinty eyes, he could also see that there was smoke wafting around the air alongside the swinging of doors. Eventually, his ears stopped ringing just in time to hear the crackly voice of Power Loader. "This is why you have to be careful, god damn it. This is like the 5th time this week." Shaking his head, he tried to push himself up, but Izuku found his body trapped beneath something. Or more accurately, someone. Glancing down, the green-haired teen felt his whole body freeze up for the umpteenth time today as he stared down a head of messy pink-haired, curved and cutting into his chest with their softness. There was also a pair of goggles staring back at him, the dark lenses reflecting his eyes back at him like a distorted mirror world before continuing to gaze at his attacker. This person was female, he could clearly tell, and the fact that he could feel it didn't help. Decked out in a loose tank top and some sort of working pants and boots, the figure began to shift in his lap. Hee, Loaderbot, this is just a happy accident, 'cause now I know not to dash. Pushing her own body up, Izuku soon found himself face to face with the piercing yellow eyes of Hatsum Mei, the crisscrosses being a clear giveaway as well as the smirk that adorned her face. "Oh hey, it's you. Welcome Izuku." Smiling at the boy, she began to rise from his form, giving Izuku an unfortunate glance as he chested as she did so, causing him to recoil and begin muttering under his breath as he tried to calm himself down while Mei finished rising from her human seat. Suddenly, he found a hand move into his face. He stared at it, confused. "What? You want to stay on the floor or something?" Even in her voice, the inventor's smirk was present in her tone as the boy looked up to see the same smirk adorning her pretty face. Quickly he took up the offer. As he stood, he saw the small form of Power Loader skulking off further into the back of the lab as he stood with Mei. Thanks." He muttered quietly, removing her hand from his as he stood. "So, what brings you to this humble abode, hey hotshot?" she asked, placing her hands on her hips as she stared him down with a smirk. "HM? Oh yeah, I am here to talk to you about a possible costume upgrade." In an instant, he saw as her eyes lit up with wonder and curiosity. "Oh, an upgrade? Yeah, I see. I help you with that. Come in, come in." In a matter of a few seconds, Izuku found himself ushered into the workshop via a slight push to his back by the girl before she ran ahead into the shop. Following her lead, he started to look around the place. All around him, Izuku saw different cut-up parts of machines and robots with wires and cables hanging out haphazardly from each one alongside a few fully built models that were blinking lights of varying colors or rotating in circles on the desk. Paired with this was a lot of loud banging of metal and cutting of scrap that the boy would consider painful, if he wasn't the owner of one for all. Eventually he made it to the center of the room with Mei. "All right, bucko, what are you looking for?" Pulling himself out of the daze he was in, he began to address her. I recently just learned about, you know, what I did at the games, right?" He quickly questioned, quirking an eyebrow at her. "You mean when you went and messed that lovely body of yours up and then you got back up and screwed it up even more? If so, then yeah, I remember." He couldn't help but sigh. After a quick explanation of his abilities, he saw that she went into a comatose of thought for a few seconds. "So, what are you actually looking for?" It should have been a simple question. Wasn't. Honestly, I have no clue. I just want something to complement my powers, honestly. Maybe something to reinforce my body, I guess. He just shrugged his shoulders at her as she continued her thoughts. "You thought about braces? Arm braces? Yeah, but they'd restrict my movement too much, and even if they weren't, I'd probably just rip them off if I get too serious. Yeah, you're right, you did get real aggressive in that fight. How about full body armor? I got a sample if you want a test run. Walking away, she quickly wheeled in some heavy-duty looking armor, with heavy patches and panels that would efficiently cover his entire being in defense. Looks a bit too much for me if I'm going to be honest. Scratching the back of his head, he began to look around the room for inspiration as May quietly listed off options in the background. All around him, he saw clamps and grips that could work, but nothing solid. However, soon his eyes landed on a suspended piece of gear that caught his attention. It was a golden frame by the looks of it, for a similar battle suit to what May had just bought out. However, this one was just the wire frame. It was simple, with only one thin wire leading down what would be the arms down to a bendable section at each elbow, then to a palm-sized circle in the center of where the hand would be on each side, with 5 other wires leading off it where the fingers would be. It didn't have legs, however, only containing a metal line that would go down the spine. To be honest, it looked exactly like the wire frame of a drawn character, like a manga character or something, but there was just an aspect of it that caught Izuku's eye. Walking closer to it, he reached out to touch it before May caught him a little too late. Oh, you might want to be careful of that. It has. Ouch. After encountering the material, he found a section of his linen cut by something, as a few drops of blood started to poke out through his skin. Alongside this, he felt the heated skin and rush of energy before they subsided. Holding his hand, he examined the material a bit closer with his eyes. Along the outside of the wire were hundreds of tiny grips and clamp-looking materials made of sharp metal. Yeah, I tried to warn ya. This is a skeleton that we put inside the suits. The grips secure it to the inside of the suit and give it extra protection, so they usually aren't exposed like this and they are never facing the skin. Sorry about that. Then that sparked an idea in Izuku. Why, you said that these clamps and grips attach it to the suits, right? She nodded. How deep would they go if they were to go into human skin? May flinched. Oh, if we go with the longest model, to the bone. I think. To the bone, huh? That's it. Turning to May with a face full of inspiration and concern, he spoke of his idea. Theoretically these grips could secure a broken bone while sacrificing the skin to make contact, correct? So what if I had a similar schematic for my own costume? Because if I'm going to be using my power, then it will just heal after coming out, and even the initial burst of pain would help boost me to that initial boost of power. Looking up from his hand, he saw the concern on her face. So, are you saying that you'd be willing to have something like this on your body to achieve your boost? You sure you're okay with that? Looking back at the frame, he clenched his hands. If I'm going to overcome this power and be a truly great hero, then I have to do anything. I have to overcome this pain, and this will help me do it. Twisting his body, he stared right into her yellow eyes with such determination and conviction that it made May shudder. Can you help me do that, May? She paused for a few seconds, then giggled. All right then, hotshot. Let's get to making your scar suit. Scar suit? Heh, not a bad name. That hurts. Yeah, metal tends to have that effect on skin. Grimacing at the snarky tone in May's tone, Izuku turned away in both a huff and a wince as the steel protrusions that jutted out of the skeleton that the girl was working on and deep into his flesh. Clenching his other hand and biting his bottom lip with such intensity and strength that he was worried that it might draw blood, the green-haired teen just sat there as the girl before him just continued to work on the mechanism that wound its way down his arm. The soft tinkering of May's screwdriver filled the air alongside Izuku's constant shuffling and harsh intakes of air that had grown very common in the last half an hour. Don't worry, hotshot, I'm almost done. Also, I recall you asking for this to be made, so don't complain, Kay? Glancing up to meet her amber orbs, the pair of eyes zooming in on his pain with their crosshairs making the Quirk inheritor feel like he was in some sort of standoff, Izuku could clearly see the snark and glee in being proven right. Before she had even begun to put the skeleton onto his body, she had marveled at how much pain he would be going through to even put this thing on. Foolishly, he said that he could take it, which resulted in Izuku's current feeling of stupidity. Yeah, I sharp intake of air, I know. This routine continued for a few minutes, with Izuku starting to tap his left hand on his legs to pull out a sense of mundanity that would dull the pain in his system to make it at least manageable. It didn't work. Then, the miraculous moment came when Mei ceased her movement and took a step back away from him, her finger on her lips as she continued to stare into his very soul-wide calculating gaze. He waited for a command. "Move your arm, see how it feels." Complying, Izuku took his right arm off the table that he had placed it on all those minutes ago, and immediately felt both the new way of the metal on his body as well as the KNKS and annoyances that he had to stretch out of his arms and joints as a result of being in his stationary position for so long. Clenching both of his fists, he leaned back alongside Mei, who he could see in the corner of his gaze leaning forward towards his body, and took in the appearance of his second skeleton. It was a strange gold color on the rack that shone with pride and glory, but now that it was stained with both blood and oil that it looked like copper, Izuku was happy that his inventor friend had picked a silver frame for him to work with. Against the pale light of his flesh, the silver stood out greatly and it would stand out even better against his costume. Alongside this, the appendage ended at his shoulder, staining his skin with its presence all the way on his right limb, acting as both a reminder that this would need to cover his entire torso when finished and at the fact that he had no shirt on, Mei having insisted that he take it off as to not damage his shirt, then having made several jokes at the expense of his nakedness. Apart from this, it looked almost exactly like the one of the rack, a long, bendable stretch of metal that snaked its way down his arm, with a second cylindrical strip following up his arm for support, until it reached his hand where I split off into 5 separate wires for each finger and ending at the second joint in each finger, first in the case of the thumb, while sharp spikes poked out from the bottom of each wire and dug deep into his skin, separated by about 20 centimeters before they hit again, creating a ring of blood around some parts of his arm. He had thrown away his bandages long ago, not seeing a need in them. However, one thing stood out about the mechanism that looked new to Izuku, and that was a hook that swung around the palm of his hand and connected on the opposite side, creating a handle that he could grab on comfortably without much damage. Why was it there? No idea. Cautiously, he slipped his grasp down his forearm, feeling a sense of fulfillment when the cool material hit his receptors and caused a chill to spread throughout his frame. Then, he reached his trek to his fingers, the metal stricture crisscrossing over a few of his malformations that existed within his skin before he slipped his metal-free hand into the embrace of his infused hand and clicked the digits that begged for release. And he felt it. The click caused the spikes to push a few cms deeper because of him bending, and that left Izuku at their mercy, causing him to cry out and for his eyes to shoot open as he felt a small dose of adrenaline kick in, boosting his healing around the holes in his flesh. During that, he saw Mei flinch, then try to move forward, but he just threw his hand up to stop her. After a while, it calmed down and the spikes were securely in his skin with the skin having been healed around them. Izuku chuckled. Going to hurt to take them out? Yep, it will, but hey, it's not like anyone warned you or anything. The pink-haired girl reminded him, smirking a fierce smile at him while an underlying tone of concern flittered around her eyes. Despite his anguish, Izuku somehow managed to shoot her a similar smile back. Then the issue of this new handle arose within Izuku's mind. Hey Mei, what's this thing for? Raising his hand once again, slowly this time, he gestured to the handle that wrapped across his right hand with an inquisitive gaze in his eyes. To this, Mei tapped the screwdriver held within her grasp against the side of her head a few times as her face scrunched up in a manner that the green-haired boy could only describe as cute, which made his face flush slightly at the thought, while she continued to ponder on the device's intention. Then, her eyes seemed to shine as she pointed her screwdriver forward. Oh, that thing. Yeah, I know what that's for. Walking forward with a spring in her step and a small swivel in her hips, Izuku just held his hand out dumbly as the pink-haired beauty took his hand into her own, more accurately her 2 hands, leaving the Quirk inheritor practically inept for the remaining few minutes as she held onto his digits. Now this is a fancy little thing that I came up with to help the whole pain train idea that you have, so you should be thanking me. Looking down, she stole a glance from his flustered gaze and her face seemed to light up as her fingers began to slow on his palm, drawing circles and swirls onto his exposed skin. The green-haired teen guessed that this was an attempt to both entertain herself and make him feel awkward. And that thought only got out after he had stopped focusing on his flushed features because of the person before him. I'm going to take your awkward mumbling as a thank you, May, for being the best inventor in the world and for gifting me this incredible thing that will help me completely obliterate my body. You know, when I say it like that, this sort of seems like a bad thing. Once again, that same snarky grin crossed her face as Izuku decided that the floor was quite interesting in the current moment. However, he was spared from any more trouble when May began to chuckle lightly. Now what does this handle do, you may ask? Well, this handle controls how far the spikes dig into your skin. Leaning down, she cupped the handle lightly before pushing it back towards his palm, and almost immediately Izuku could feel the pain that constantly shot into his arm begin to vanish. That was when he decided to look down and bear witness to the spikes begin to retract upward, coiling in on themselves so they could simply exist without always causing some sort of pain. To some, it might seem small. To Izuku, this was a big deal. May, I never thought about that sort of thing before. Well, I thought that you wouldn't want 2 centimeters long pieces of steel entering your body at all times. Only at certain times. One thing I have to tell you though is to not pull too hard on the handle, you know, not too hard away from your palm, I mean. He looked at her with a confused gaze. Let me just show you. Prepare for some more pain, by the way. Wait, what? Wrapping one of her small, dainty hands around the handle, she pulled it back towards herself, and in an instant, Izuku could feel the spikes shoot back out into his flesh once more. As a sort of recoil effect, his left hand began to clench and curl in on itself while his teeth began to gnaw on his tongue once more. All the while, May just had this look of guilt and annoyance at herself the whole time as she pulled onto the handle. I'm sorry about this, Izuku, I really am. But I'm a show kind of girl, you know? Why a sharp intake, I understand, don't worry about it. After a while, the pink-haired student reset the mechanism so that the green-haired boy didn't have the spines digging into his body, causing a few streams of crimson to trickle off his arm and drip to the floor below. Cautiously, May took a few steps back to examine the state of both the boy and the machine before her as Izuku continued to huff and at the release of his pain. Well, thank you, May, this will really Give me a sec, need to adjust something. And just like that, the engineer strolled over to him and began to position his arms so it was stuck straight horizontally before taking a seat on the only place available, Izuku's lap. Placing her body down onto him, she seemed perfectly content to just continue working on the mechanism, offering not so much as a slight hum of knowledge at what she was doing to the Quirk inheritor and how his body had effectively shut down in a sea of red. He felt so flustered, so speechless, so warm. Her body pressed against him seemed to just make him feel warm, feel like she was there for him. It may just be a simple embrace, but to someone like Izuku, who had often been cited as being a social outcast as a response to not only his quirklessness but also his social ineptness and list of strange and wonderful traits, just made it so that any sort of positive interaction with people made the boy feel warm and happy inside. To be honest, he hadn't experienced much physical affection either, so this was new for him. However, that sentiment didn't really help him and his raging hormones at this current moment. Thrown into a cluster of stumbling and spitting out what very few words that he could muster, Izuku just stared wide-eyed at the girl who was completely ignoring his presence and instead continued to work on the mechanism like he wasn't even there. And she stayed that way for some time. You know, this seat is actually really comfortable. I might try finding one for my home, you know? Don't worry, I'm just messing with you. I'll be a few more moments hotshot, so just keep your hormones under control for a little bit longer. And even now, after she had personally acknowledged it, he still couldn't help but hone in on this very basic fact that she was sitting sitting on him. Personally, it seemed like something from a badly written web story or a crappy rom-com, but he still couldn't help but acknowledge it. He had no shirt on after all, so he could feel every curve of her back pressing against him with only the thin veil of her tank top stopping the two pieces of flesh from connecting. And from this position and his profound height above the girl, he had a very clear view of her front as well, something that seemed almost like a blessing and a curse at the same time. In the end, Everything was designed just to make Izuku feel nervous and jittery and done. Hopping up from her perch with a spring in her step, Mei turned on her heels to look at the boy with a sense of mischief and a sense of curiosity in her amber orbs. So, how's it feel? I tightened the coils in the upper layer of the arms so that you would have more traction and so it would feel less weighted and you can move around easier. Pretty neat, huh? He just nodded, face still flushed while his eyes were trailed onto his silver skeleton. Cautiously, he began to lift his arm and felt that the weight that was previously affecting his limbs had been lifted slightly, allowing his arm more movement and freedom. Glancing back up to meet Mei's calculating gaze, he offered her a small smile. Why, yeah, it feels way better now. Thank you. To this, he received a similarly kind smile and the slightly flushed cheeks of one pink-haired girl. Well, that's alright, allowed me to test out some new tech and it helped you out with your powers, so it worked out for the both of us. Now then, class is gonna start soon, so you should get your muscles back in their shirt, don't you think? Not that I mind, of course, just some people can get so jealous these days. The snark and intent to cause him embarrassment was clearly there, yet Izuku still fell for it despite her smirk and the alluring expression present in her eyes that clearly gave her intentions away. Nevertheless, he complied to her commands, shying away from her peering and giggling figure as he went. He removed the mechanism now attached to his arm. Attempted to remove the mechanism now attached to his arm. What it actually resulted in was Izuku getting the mechanism off his arm, but no, without it catching his skin and making his and grumble as the metal pricked him, while Mei just continued to giggle at him. Ignoring her noise, the green-haired teen took a look upon his arm, complete with the few, still wet, drops of blood that had been secreted from his cuts, and all he could do was sigh. Guess I'll have to get used to this sight as well then. He was meant to say it quietly, but apparently he wasn't quiet enough, as Mei just suddenly stopped moving and started to look upon his form as though he had a second head, which wasn't too uncommon in this day of age. Just from that quick glance, he could see the panic and the confusion in her yellow eyes, the color of sunshine burning deep into his core as he suddenly felt a wave of emotions drown him in there. Embrace. Sorry I was. Don't worry about it, Izuku. Just remember that you don't have to shoulder everything just cause your body can take a little bit more now, okay? As she spoke, Mei began to walk over to him, all the while keeping his gaze as she walked. No swagger, no sass, no snark, just genuine care. And it stayed that way, their eyes locked together as she expressed her desires for his powers, for a while, until Izuku began to feel a certain warmth around his hand. Quietly breaking her gaze, he looked down to see the pink-haired girl running her gentle and small hands over the cuts and scars of his hand, which also resulted in her getting some of his blood on her fingers. Not that she really minded. If Izuku was being honest, that bit also felt really nice. Comforting, warm, painful. But what was that for? Turns out, during the time when she had taken him into her hands, she had decided that she needed to flick his just healed arm to... Well, to be honest, he didn't know why, but she had done it, and it had hurt. Just testing a theory, hotshot, calm down. Now I don't know if nurse lady, recovery girl, told you this, but it looks like your skin becomes very sensitive after healing, so don't get anyone to touch it during that time or it'll hurt like a beach. And that goes for your suit as well, cause that will hurt even more. In fact, it will hurt like a motherfucker. Chuckling at her as she performed some eccentric hand movements in front of his face, Izuku could only smile. And when did you become a doctor? She smirked. When you asked. Hotshot. He shuddered. When did I ask you that? I don't worry about it, you didn't. Then why? However, one final thing. You mentioned that you didn't know when your thingamajig activated? Well, if we're using this limb as an example, it appears that it activates when the injury or pain inflicted upon yourself would leave a normal person crippled. So, hope that helps, I guess. She just shrugged nonchalantly despite giving out quite grave information that made Izuku actually shudder. Yeah, thanks, I guess. Welp, you better get going or else you're going to be pretty late for class. What have you got last PRD actually? Watching as the teen stood up from his desk and go to retrieve his shirt, that she may or may not have tried to hide, Mei began to question the boy. Hero training, I believe. Slipping on his shirt and securing it with the buttons, he went to go grab his tie, but somehow Mei got there first. Let me. Without another word, the short girl flipped up his collar and swung the tie around his neck before beginning to tie it. For Izuku, this was the third time in like 10 minutes that the girl had been this close to him. And he didn't exactly hate it. Sure, he felt flustered and hot, but nothing that he hated per se. He did note that Mei was using the time taken to tie his tie as a means to touch his body though, which he once again didn't really hate. It was all just sort of overwhelming. Finally, though, she finished ending off her services with a little tap on his chest and a smile. All done. Now then, stop staring and go to class. Giggling, she pushed the boy backwards and towards his bag while she spun on her heels and started to saunter away, a sway in his hips and the same swagger, sass and snark radiating off her form as she went. Shaking his head, Izuku retrieved his bag and began to walk out, but not before requesting one more thing. Hey mate, can I come back tomorrow? I have a few new costume ideas that I want to run by. Popping her head back from the mech that she had begun working on, she gave him a sincere smile to finish his leave. Yeah, sure Izuku, see you tomorrow. Wait a sec dash. For a second, she vanished, before emerging back from her machine to fling the mechanical skeleton that they had been working on at the teen, who fumbled and flailed around when presented with the machine. Looking confused at the device for a short time, Izuku soon realized that she must have picked it up when she was looking over him a few minutes ago. A catch? Showing Izuku another smile, she started to wave him off and out of the workshop. What? I gave you your scar suit, so go on, beat it. I gotta tend to my babies and currently you're taking all of my attention away from them. Shaking his head and her twist in attitude, the green-haired boy began to leave. Okay then, bye Mei. See ya, hotshot. As the heavy doors of the workshop closed before her, Mei felt herself let out a fierce sigh as her face and body flushed red. Working with Izuku was strange. He had been awkward and had fumbled over everything while she had worked on him, but he was also really brave to even have the idea to go through with this sort of thing. Brave or stupid, that is. Trailing a finger across the side of her massive mecha, the pink-haired girl retired to the seat that said boy had been sitting in mere minutes ago. Just sitting there, she could feel the few drops of blood that had spilt onto the seat and the floor below her, and there was just enough to incite worry but not cause a panic. Was he really ready for this? Or had this new power set of his quirk messed with his mind enough where he thought that he would be able to constantly handle this sort of pain? To be honest, she didn't know, and she knew for a fact that she wouldn't be getting more answers until tomorrow. Leaning back against the steel frame of the chair, Mei began to examine and look over her hand, a few drops of the green-haired self-destroyer's blood having dried on her fingers and knuckles. Running her dainty fingers over the skin, she sighed once again. I hope you know what you're doing, Izuku, I really do. Panting heavily as he reached the door of the changing rooms, Izuku started to slowly use the wall as support while he made his way towards the door. He had started walking from Mei's workshop a few minutes ago only to hear the warning. Bell cast a deafening shadow over the school, which had forced him to begin running due to the changing rooms being on the opposite side of the school from the workplace. So, he had to run. Aside from looking pretty stupid from just running around sets of students to get to class, Izuku noted that quite a few people were looking at him weirdly. It might have been because of the fact that he was running, but he had noticed the stares from before he even started. Groups of people that began to bore into his very being when he walked by, ceasing any kind of conversation they previously were involved in to instead whisper in quiet, illegible tones. Some held curiosity in their gaze, others held some form of spite and jealousy, and some just looked strangely attracted to his figure as he sped down the corridor, but that might have just been his imagination. Either way, it sort of creeped him out if he was being completely honest. Finally, he was broken out of his mind-filled haze as he made it to the door and watched tiredly as it swung open and into the male changing room. Even from outside the room, noise just exploded all over his stagnant and frozen form, from the hushed murmurs of the girls on the other side of the wall to the loud cursing of Bakugo to the disciplinary shouts of Ida and what seemed to be Mineta as he tried to do. Well, it was something to do with the girls, that was for sure. In response, Izuku couldn't help but sigh. Seemed like just a normal day at Yui. Making his way into the changing room, he tried to divert as much attention away from himself as possible, focusing on making it in time for practice while also catching back his breath. Once again, luck wasn't on his side. Izuku, where have you been? You're usually one of the first ones here. The eccentric and over-the-top voice of Ida spoke out behind his as he began to take of his top for the second time that day. Twisting his head, he just saw the speedster standing behind him with a quizzical gaze in his eyes. Throwing his tie to the bench, he relented. Just working on some stuff, Ida, nothing really to worry about. If you are sure, my friend. Chuckling slightly at his friend's nature, Izuku returned to dressing himself in his hero attire. However, as he was about to put it on, he paused. Glancing down at it, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed by it. The protrusions at the top of the hood that were supposed to look like All Might's hair looked dopey and stupid to the point where they had been mistaken for bunny ears more than a few times. The crappy mask that had a tacky and fake smile painted onto it looked like some sort of cosplay rather than anything productive. The out-of-place padding and cartoon mascot-like gloves just seemed off-putting and tacky. That's the word to describe his costume perfectly, actually, tacky. Holding it in his hands, Izuku began to smooth over some of the creases with his fingers, and as the scarred pieces of flesh came into view, his eyes narrowed slightly. Yes, this was the power of All Might, of All for One, but now his new thing had activated and he was drifting ever further away from All Might, and to be honest, that was okay. If he was going to be the best hero that he could, he needed to be unique and needed to differentiate himself from someone like All Might, yet his costume didn't speak this. Instead, it spoke of a mere imitator of the actual thing, of a faker trying to be All Might with cheap tricks and plastic. All of these thoughts got ideas plaguing Izuku's mind, ideas of whether or not he could be the new symbol of peace after All Might, if this was really meant to be, or in actuality he was meant for something different. Hell, his new powers seemed to dictate that, after all, who would want to look up to someone that needed to cause harm to themselves in order to save the day? Izuku? Breaking out of his trance-like state once more, the green-haired boy soon realized that he was outside in the cityscape area that they had used in the first training session as well as the entrance exams. Looking down, he noticed that he had dressed himself in his costume and was fully clothed before glancing over to his right to see Uraraka, also in her costume, looking at him anxiously. "HM? What's wrong?" "Nothing, you were just sort of spacing out is all." Shrugging her shoulders, the shorter girl swiveled on her heels and back towards the front where All Might and Aizawa were situated. All around him, Izuku could tell that his other classmates were also waiting for one of the two people at the front to begin talking and give them some insight on what they were doing. Glancing down, the green-haired boy noticed the metallic scar suit gripped between his right and left hand, hidden from the sight of those around him. Gripping onto it, he felt one of the grips cut through the cloth of his gloves and cause a wave of crimson to begin poking out from his skin. Yet he didn't do anything to cover it, he just let it grow and expand until a large drop fell from grace and hit the earth with an audible splash. Still, he kept his eyes forward, even when Uraraka turned to him in confusion. "If we could have your attention, please." Refocusing in on their teacher, Izuku and the rest of his class let their eyes rest on the form of Eraserhead and All Might. "Today we have a test for you, one like the test that you took part in during one of the first days at the academy, a classic heroes versus villains fight." Aizawa somehow managed to get that out before he was interrupted by the much more demanding All Might. "Young students, today you will be performing exercises in groups consisting of heroes and villains, much like your first hero lesson." "I just said that." "This time, however, instead of going after a device, you will be using your quirks to rescue a hostage who will also be one of your classmates." Shooting his eyes around the collection of students, he saw a few of them at a loss of what to do, especially Bakugo, who seemed quite disappointed at being a savior hero for a change. "Now, we will choose who will be paired up as heroes, as villains, and who will be acting as the hostage." For a few minutes, Izuku just stood in silence, letting the world around him sink his whole form into itself as noise and shuffling of other students caught his eyes and ears in distraction, which he was actually pretty happy of. After a while, Aizawa and All Might had picked out the selection. "Alright, Team A will be Bakugo and Tsuyu as the heroes versus Kaminari and Kuda as the villains with Mineta as the hostage." Standing still to observe the emotions that were flowing around the room, Izuku witnessed the harsh clicking of Bakugo's tongue as he strolled off with a depressed-looking Tsu following behind him as Kaminari just shrugged and wandered over to his partner who actually looked sort of happy to be with someone like Kaminari, and Mineta just looked white. Chuckling, Izuku turned around to walk back into the waiting room until a large hand slapped itself down onto his shoulder. Swiveling his head, he saw the ever-smiling face of his mentor. Young Midoriya. Hey All Might. Listen, are you sure that you're able to take part and fight? You with your whole new top secret thing? Yeah, I'll be fine. Thank you for the concern though. No worries. It's what I do. Strolling back down and towards the hall with All Might at his side, he waited a while before he saw the giant's head turn down to look upon his arms, which was where his mechanical skeleton was being held. Turning back, Izuku could tell that the man had questions about it. Sighing, the teen relented. It's just some experimental tech that I was working on at lunch. It should help me with achieving adrenaline activation and allow me to use its powers without the random chance that it had before, when I didn't know how much damage I had to take before it activated, but with this it's a certainty, making it. Unknowingly, the boy had begun to mumble under his breath, causing Yagi to just stare at him with a thin veil of confusion and acceptance glazing his vision. Okay, young Midoriya, I think I understand. As long as you know what you're doing with it. Returning his successor's smile with his own, the pro-hero couldn't help but feel a little cautious at the device Izuku now held. It looked sharp and dangerous, something that could activate his powers while still hurting him. From that, his eyes slipped down to the boy's scarred and injured hand, frowning at the sight. Those scars would be with him forever, etched into his skin as reminder of his first activation for the rest of his life, and he didn't know if that was scary or endearing. Shaking his head, he noticed that the group had reached the observation room. For a short while, it was just the preparation phase, so everyone in the room remained stagnant and anxious, resorting to light chat and conversation to get them through. Izuku stood idly by Yurikaka and Ida as they talked to some others throughout the class like Kirishima and Toru, just allowing them all to talk and dull his senses to the rest of the world. Due to his quirkless nature, he hadn't had much reason to speak in school for fear of being shut down, so he just learned to listen to others and found it to be quite relaxing. Speaking wasn't his best ability, but he enjoyed noise, and other people talking did just that. Releasing a light sigh, he heard everyone around him quieten and shift towards the screens at the front of the room. There, it broadcast the beginning of the match between the two teams, with one screen showing the heroes awkwardly standing around while the other two showed a cowering Mineta and the two villains making small talk with each other. Overall, the atmosphere seemed relatively calm. Then the siren rang. Suddenly, both teams were thrown into action, with Bakugo rushing forward into the desolate building that they were fighting in while Azui started to climb the building. It was a smart tactic. Whether it was intentional or not was another story, but flanking the enemy from both sides and grabbing the hostage in the chaos was smart. And to their credit, that's what the heroes did. Bakugo rushed in headfirst and stormed the two unprepared heroes who tried to fight back, but it just ended with the two of them lodged into the wall. Well, Kaminari was while Kuda just looked down at him in worry, while Azui grabbed Mineta and left. Heroes 1, villains. Next up was a team consisting of Momo and Todoroki as villains, while Shuji and Siro as heroes, with Toru as the hostage. Due to this, the match was a strange cat and mouse where both heroes and villains struggled to figure out where the restrained girl was in order to retrieve or defend her. In the end, the timer beat everyone. Villains win that round. After a while, Izuku gave up counting and let the bright colors and breaking environments take over his vision while his mind sank into an abyss of nothingness. Different matchups and characteristics of each student that he might be paired with sprang up every once in a while, but apart from that he just let his body relax for a short while. All throughout the day he had been on edge or too hyped up on his own excitement to step back and relax a small bit. And he did just that. Will be Midoriya and Ishido against Kaminari and Satu with Uraraka as the hostage. Get to your places. In fact, he got so caught up his own mind that he missed out on most of the matches, only tuning in for his own matchup, and even then, he seemed lost in his own world. Shaking his head, he felt a small tug on his sleeves and followed it to find Mina looking at him with a quirked eyebrow. Izuku, you okay, man? Blinking a few times at her question, he shook his head again before responding. Why, I'm good, don't worry. The pink-skinned girl smiled. Good. Now come on, move your butt or we'll be too late for the villain beatdown. I've been meaning to teach Kirishima a lesson for a while now. Laughing lightly at her as the two began to walk down the halls and to the arena, Izuku couldn't help but take her in. By every sense of the word, Mina was a strange girl. Appearance-wise? She had pink skin and horns alongside two very strange-looking eyes that, while not too uncommon separately, still looked quite out of place when put together. Personality-wise? Her strange dialect and casual nature seemed rather foreign to his laid-back and shy personality. However, that wasn't really a bad thing. Sure, it was new and unusual, but Izuku found her bubbly personality refreshing and new alongside Uraraka's, and her still could appreciate her appearance and would go so far as to call her pretty or beautiful despite the strangeness that most people focused on. This wasn't something that he should be focusing in on now though. Finally making it to the building, the hero duo found themselves waiting once more in order to prepare. Spinning on her heels, Mina spun round to meet him, having to look up slightly due to the boy being 2 to 3 inches taller than her. So then Muscles, what cha got for me? We storm the fort, fly over the top, tunneling underneath. Once again, he had to chuckle at her over-the-top personality. However, she did make some valid points. Storming the front of the building could be good. With his power and her unique quirk, they could disrupt Kirishima and Sata long enough to haul Uraraka out of the building. But the two of them have quirks that boost their strength or at least play into it, so Mina could be put down quite easily. Sneaking around could be good as well, but it could go wrong if they were cornered. Casting his eyes above them, he noted how tall the building was. About 4 stories. He could make that. Judging by the other matches, the hostages and the villains usually held up in the top floor of the complex, so coming in hard from the air could give them valuable time and resources to take them down and get Uraraka out. A surprise attack, a mixture of the two ideas he just had. You're okay with heights, right, Mina? Yeah, I guess. Why'd you ask? Oh, we climbing? Sort of. Stepping back, he looked down at the mechanical limb that he held in his possession. Time to put it on. Grabbing a hold of the right sleeve of his costume, he roughly tugged it down his arm until he heard it rip and the material collapse down towards the concrete. Flexing the limb a few times to make sure that it was all right to be used and had no case, briefly caught Mina's face burst into a lilac flurry at the sight of his exposed flesh and how it tensed and flexed, but a sly smirk managed to make it to her face as well. Not that I mind seeing all of that, Izuku, but why have you done that? Answering her question with an action, the green-haired boy hauled the contraption of steel up and towards his free arm before beginning to strap it down to his skin and slip his digits through the handle. Making sure it was secure around himself, the team took in a deep inhale of air as his body began to shake in harsh anticipation of the sharp pain that was soon to come. Locking eyes with his partner, he gave her a gentle smile. Sorry if this annoys you. If what? As soon as the harsh sound of the siren rang out through the arena, Izuku bit his tongue before pulling the handle back on the device. Hard. In an instant, the cool barbs of steel injected themselves into his flesh and buried themselves deep, causing a flash flood of pain to shoot through the boy's body. And he did not stop himself from screaming. F-. Throwing himself into the steel railings behind him, the teen just began to grunt and curse as he gripped his arm for support, and the adrenaline began to surge around his whole form. Shuddering and shaking with the new flush of power that began to shoot through his veins, he just looked forward with complete resolve while the world pulsated and shook in sharp pitches of red and blue, buildings and shapes shifting into a new color spectrum for a few short moments before ceasing. Beside him, he could hear Mina's worried voice, her frantic movements as she shook him, her concerned look and pleading face right before his eyes, and for a split second, he could see her as a normal girl, pale skin, light blonde hair and green eyes that wouldn't stand out too much in this quirked world, but to Izuku it reminded him of himself, of how he was so plain and useless before. How he had to embrace his quirk and give it all the attention it deserved. Soon, his labored breathing began to slow and he managed to look Mina in the eye and hear her worries. Izuku. For F's sake man, Can you hear me? He smiled. She was worried because she cares. Or at least he hoped so. Reaching up, the boy pushed his hand up to her exposed shoulder, touching the skin with care and a gentle nature as to not inflict any damage upon her. Hey, I'm good. Don't worry about. Gritting his teeth as he began to stand once more, he could still see the look of worry etched into the face of the teen before him, her eyes wide at her mouth agape. What the hell was? No time now. You still all right with going up? Stopping her questioning, he got a slow nod back. Good. Smashing his right digits together into a fist, he felt the intensity of the skin and its heat as lightning and sparks of red crackled and shot off around him. Then, in an instant, he shot forward, the feeling of cracking in his ankles still prevalent, before winding his arms around Mina so that he was carrying her. It happened so quickly that the girl couldn't really comprehend what was going on with her face stained lilac and her eyes and mouth wide once more before Izuku just looked down at her and smiled. Don't worry, I've got you. And she believed him. Jumping lightly on the spot to gain some momentum, Izuku then shot off, the sound of mending in his bones stopping for another round of cracking. The duo soared through the air with blinding speed, constantly being barraged by Izuku's sparks of crimson that marked the air with their crackling. Tightening his grip on Mina's body, Izuku began to coordinate where he was going to land and how much force he would have to exert in order to break through the concrete ceiling. Skin in his teeth, he made a quick, split-second decision and rolled when he hit the floor. Wrapping Mina tight into himself as he did in order not to hurt her, the green-haired teen winced as his landing caused a multitude of cracks and sharp edges to emerge all over the building, with the small crevasse slowly catching up to his moving form. Finally, as he finished he let go of the pink-haired girl, and soon the two were standing upright, facing one another. Glancing around, Izuku noticed that the two of them had passed a window on the way up here and from the previous recordings, that the hostages were usually kept near it or in a separate room away from the villains. As he began to speak up, he caught eyes with Mina only to see her cheeks a deep lilac. Quirking an eyebrow, he began to quietly talk to her as to not alert the others below. What's up? Hm? Oh, nothing, don't worry about it. She gave him a wide, convincing grin, but that didn't stop the purple on her cheeks. Izuku just sort of shrugged it off though. If you say so. Just tell me if anything is okay? She smiled a small smile that showed her gratitude. Good. Now I think I have an idea. I'll enter from here, drop down right on top of them while you sneak around using the top window that we passed over there to get down and find Uraraka. If you need some advice, I'd say use hydrochloric acid to melt away the wall for climbing, but make sure to only do it a few feet cause with your level of strength with acids, it would corrode right into the room if you left it long enough. Once again, he had begun to ramble and Mina saw this as her opportunity as to get back at him for making her feel embarrassed, even though she really wasn't. Been taking notes on me, have you, Izuku? And she got the exact reaction she wanted. His face began to burn and heat up as his eyes went wide and he stopped his ramblings of the plan to instead just mutter incoherently. I can explain. Well, do it later, Muscles. 'Cause we have to go through this amazing plan of yours. Sticking her tongue at him, she started to walk towards the massive crack on the floor and towards the edge of the building, making sure to put a certain swing in her hips as she went. As she did so, she smirked considering the fact that she knew what she was doing to the poor boy without even looking at him. When she finally made it, she spun on her heels and looked Izuku in the eye, who had moved to the other side of the roof and where he was making preparations to break in. Not break eye contact, it began to walk backwards while saluting him. Be vigilant, be swift, be strong. That was what she left Izuku with before plummeting off the side of the building, screaming as she went down. All the boy could offer in return was a pitiful shake of the head as he cracked and reset his knuckles before charging them full of all for one and smashing them down onto the concrete below him, causing the figments and fractures to come apart at his feet and fly around his form as he began to fall into the dimly lit room below. Izuku didn't have to wait long until he hit the surface. Rolling again into a crouched position, he quickly surveyed the room with a calculating eye. From his first impressions, it looked as though Kirishima and Satu were focused on the window where Mina had just fell, probably attracted there by her screaming, and so had not yet turned around to face him. Just beside them, Uraraka lay wrapped in some sort of thick metal cable, much stronger than average rope that they usually use to tie up fake hostages. That was when Izuku realized that this situation was entirely revolved around his and Mina's quirks. His strength could simply rip the wires off, but that could lead to some difficulties if there was anything inside, whereas Mina's acid could simply burn through it, and even that could lead to some problems if she wasn't careful enough. Taking advantage of his classmates' dazed phases, Izuku struck. Blasting forward, he stopped just before Sada's body and performed a jump that propelled him over the larger male, landing roughly on his head before performing a spinning twirl in the air that resulted in him being eye to eye with the confused boy. Once again he used this, spinning around until he could kick Sada straight in the face with his foot that wasn't powered up by One for All, resulting in the Sugar Quirk user flying towards the nearest wall but no serious damage. Landing, he saw that Kirishima had begun to turn around and had activated his hardening quirk, so Izuku resorted to just bolting forward and smashing his fist into the back of Kirishima's head, sending the boy sprawling to the floor below and resulting in a multitude of cracks to emerge around his red hair. Once again, Izuku knew that his quirk would protect him. Gritting his teeth, he reset his arms and knuckles as he moved past the fallen foes and towards the window. Catching a glimpse of Uraraka in the reflection, he just saw her stunned and shocked look, which made him chuckle. However, he also caught her wide-eyed expression and sudden shouting a bit too late, as before he knew it, Sada had wrapped his hand around his torso and had thrown him backwards towards the dry wall positioned at the back of the room. Izuku managed to right himself after colliding with the floor painfully once, ending up back in a crouched position and his foot touching said wall. Looking up, he saw Sada rubbing his head while Kirishima was doing the same, spouting out a few words and mumbles before turning around to face him. As they did, the quirk inheritor stood to full height to match them. Cracking his knuckles, he smirked alongside Kirishima. Izuku, that was a pretty good punch. I can see why you could take down Todoroki. Thanks. Pushing his hand down, he wrapped it around his mechanism's handle before pulling it, causing a small jolt of pain to push forth into his system. Biting his tongue, he felt that new pain alongside the pain from hitting both people before him and his rolling fiasco a few seconds ago flood his system and cause a bright array of crimson sparks to come flying off his form, blinding the area around him in a scarlet light. Ignoring the stunned views of both of his opponents, his eyes instead drifted to Uraraka, who, while also holding a large amount of curiosity and pride in her eyes, also held worry and concern. Glancing down, he could only offer her a sympathetic smile as he saw a small trail of blood begin to fall from the first 2 holes in his arm, trailing down his wrist like a small stream. Shaking that out of his head, he heard another crack as he shot himself forward once more, meeting Kirishima head-on. Smirking at one another once more, the 2 quirk users feed each other's fists with their own, creating a small shockwave to be exerted from their force. Running his knuckles up the red-haired boy's own, he felt the metal of his metallic limbs scrape against his skin like steel on steel, throwing his hand above his head and allowing his to give him a rough shove that sent him flying back a few feet. Centering himself once more, Izuku threw up his left arm in preparation for Sada's own attack, which hit him like a truck and caused him to jump to the right a couple of feet. Holding his footing, he eventually managed to push him back with a shoulder charge, shooting into his chest and sending him backwards, stumbling over his own 2 feet. Grunting, he checked his arm as he heard movement behind him. Izuku! Hey, why'd you start without me? Turning his head, his eyes met with Mina's, an unnatural amount of sass and sarcasm in her voice as he gazed down at Kirishima's body while shaking her head. Mina, Uraraka's wrapped in some thick metal wires. Do you think that you can melt through them? I think I can, but why don't you just rip them off? They wouldn't have put that there unless they had something inside them that could hurt me or her if I pulled it off, so you're the safer option. Oh, got it. Cover me then, alright? Winking at him, she walked over Kirishima's chest, leaving him groaning in pain as she neared Uraraka, giving her a wide, toothy grin. Sighing, Izuku spun on his heels as he heard Sada begin to move from the floor alongside Kirishima. Hey Satu, you deal with Izuku. I'll get Mina. Gotcha. Gritting his teeth, Izuku bit his tongue hard in order to spark a small amount of pain from his system before charging his fists with one for all infused with adrenaline as. He charged forward towards Satu, who was woefully unprepared for him, and smashed him on the back with a sickening crunch coming from his hands afterwards. However, it worked and Satu was sent careening a few floors down below them, hitting the earth with a thud and Loosing himself in the pain for a brief moment, Izuku quickly heard the shuffling of Kirishima as he stood and started towards Mina, the girl complaining and making jokes at his expense as he neared. Spinning on his heels, he dashed towards the man before calling out to the acid user. "Mina!" Acid on the floor below him. "You got it, muscles." Muscles? Ignoring Uraraka's flustered call, Izuku watched as Kirishima clipped on a wave of thick turquoise liquid, falling forward before Izuku got there. Channeling his power once more, he moved in front of Kirishima and roared as he caught both of his fists under the hardening user's chin, sending him sky-high and through the roof as a result. Huffing and taking in deep breaths, he could hear the brief lapse of silence that the two girls behind him had. Holy shit! Cracking his knuckles, Izuku then began to hop off several pieces of rubble that scattered the landscape and launched himself towards the hole. Waiting there for a few seconds, he then challenged one for all once again and suddenly caught the red riot in his grasp. For a brief second all was still. Then, Izuku swung both himself and Kirishima around and launched the hardened boy like a javelin down through the building and towards the ground at phenomenal speeds, resulting in his breaking the foundation and hitting the floor with a thud. Landing on his knees, Izuku hissed in brief pain as it flared up in his legs, but he could already feel adrenaline healing his wounds quickly before fading. The pain was gone. Panting heavily, he pushed the handle back towards his palm and the spikes on his devices retracting, skiing back into the metallic creation as he cradled his hand. Looking over to the side, his sight caught both that of Mina and Uraraka, who had been freed at this point, and they were both staring at him with a mixture of emotions. Sighing, he shuffled backwards until he hit a wall and slumped down. Reaching down, he began to remove the small straps of wires that held the device to his arm, watching as it fell to the concrete with a metallic ping. Running his left hand up and down his arm, he could feel the small holes on his arm and how they were pretty much completely healed, only leaving a layer of dried flesh left in their wake. However, the blood was still there, pooling around his arm and towards his knuckles, dripping onto the floor with soft thuds. Chuckling slightly to himself, he spoke. Well, that was a successful test run. Not removing his eyes from the floor, Izuku didn't move when he heard footsteps coming towards him, or when Uraraka moved down to crouch next to him, or when Mina sat beside him at the wall, or when the gravity quirk user took his bloodied and scarred hand into her own tiny ones, running her dainty fingers over each piece of blood or raised piece of hardened flesh. Only did he look at them both when he felt her fingers grip onto him hard and her voice become shaky. "Why you owe us an explanation, Izuku. Now, was it possible to feel lonely in a quirked world? In a world populated by those who could fly of their own volition, of people able to manipulate the very fabric of the world, of men and women who could shift their genetic makeup at will, of a world where extra limbs or extra body parts were common? Could something as simple as loneliness, a problem so easily solved by companionship and kindness, even exist?" Yes, it did. Quietly tapping his fingers atop the wooden desk, Izuku could hear the faint echoes bounce and dash around the room. How his mind had wandered onto this topic, he couldn't really know. Nothing too serious had happened to make him question the foundation of society, nothing to make him accuse the quirked world of a serious crime or even ponder its meaning in general. Nothing too out of the ordinary had happened to make him think these things, so why was he? Glancing down at his fidgeting fingers, he began to spy the bandages bound tightly around his arms, snaking their way down his flesh like linen serpents that constricted and suffocated his dead and crippled flesh away from society. Maybe that was why he began to think. These scars, the ones the bandages were hiding from the world, were caused by his quirk, the power passed on to him by another person without blood or heritage involved. In that case, he was isolated alongside All Might and all the other one for all users, trapped within the stigma and the gross oversimplification of the world, that their combined and crystallized power couldn't and shouldn't be possible, It was a secret that they must all keep to their graves, for it put the very world into scale that they would not be able to escape from if the truth came out. In that way, he was lonely, not being allowed to share and talk about his secret to those that cared so much about his well-being. Deep down though, he knew it wasn't that. In that circumstance, he still wasn't completely alone, and he had others that could understand what he was going through, others that he could relay his feelings to, like Recovery Girl and even All Might himself, others that had to go through all the same crap that he was going through now. In fact, for them, in a world growing accustomed to the mere idea of powers and innate abilities built within the human genome, it must have been far harder. So, it wasn't that which made him ponder. It could have been the unrelenting weight pushed upon him by the acceptance of the quirk. Even the users which had come before him hadn't had the ideology of All Might pushed upon them, the position of the symbol of peace move upon them. Yes, they had readily accepted the quirk and the powers it granted, but to his knowledge, on the man who had gifted it to him personally had managed to rise throughout the hero's society with it. It was to such a degree that the very island of Japan seemed to wish him success, while it droves of people prayed to this modern, super-powered god. And Izuku had to live up to that? The teen had previously been drowning in worry and desire for the man's quirk that he hadn't really thought about the aftermath of his actions, and so he was now sitting here, the very fate of the hero community in his shaky, scarred hand. In that aspect, he truly was alone. Even then though, there were people like Todoroki and Bakugo who were pushing themselves against hell and heaven to reach the #1 spot too, against forces like Endeavor and fate itself. So even the impossible odds put before him were shared by others like him. Then perhaps it was the nature of his quirk. Adrenaline. Its very foundation was pure agony, pure fury, that to exert even the slightest amount of power a sacrifice must be made on the part of the user, a toll paid in blood to unleash massive amounts of built-up energy and force on top of the power granted by one for all. Truly, it was a magnificent side effect. Maybe even a whole other quirk if pushed to its limit, but that is where the ideologies of the future and the ideologies of society clashed. When Izuku was younger, he used to watch All Might fight villains all the time, watched All Might save people, watched All Might bat away problems like they were nothing, and he completely idolized him. Still does, but the main reason why was because he seemed indestructible. Everything he did with a smile that showcased his power and strife, that showed how he wasn't at all scared of death or chaos. That was why Izuku and so many others looked up to him. But how would he be able to be that for the next generation when every attack he gave off, every time he jumped in to save someone, he would have to bleed? The very act showed how weak he truly was, that he wasn't able to save himself, let alone a hostage or someone in danger. That was where he was alone. Loneliness, it wasn't the first time he had felt it. Being quirkless had its downsides, and now he was truly embrace. Deku! Jolting up from the impact of the verbal bullet, Izuku suddenly recalled where he was, being interrogated by his friends in their classroom. Almost immediately, his skin felt hot and raw, stained scarlet from the intensity of the glares he was receiving. Surrounding him sat the impatient forms of Uraraka, Mina, Ida, Kirishima and Toru. Ida and Uraraka, he understood. They all walked to the station together, but Mina, Kirishima and Toru didn't make much sense, but considering his situation, he wasn't in much position to be questioning those around him. His guess was that the invisible heroine was walking home with the pink-skinned teen, who was staying behind to figure out why her teammates suddenly become a literal bloody superhuman during their training session, and the hardening hero was in a similar position. Vaguely, Izuku began to quickly recall how he ended up in this predicament. After his fight with Kirishima and Satu, he had begun to feel lightheaded and dizzy, and so tried to get back to the waiting room as quickly as possible. Before he did, he tried to ignore the prying questions from Uraraka and Mina while helping up his opponents up, which not only left him in hot water with them for not responding in the right way, but also under the gaze of the red-headed individual he helped, who suddenly became very interested in how his quirk operated. By the time he got back to the waiting room, he had to deal with the staring and the open-mouthed responses from most of his classmates before Aizawa pretty much forced the class to continue. He had provided Izuku with the bandages to cover his arms, gifted to him by Recovery Girl because she knew how reckless and uncontrollable the teen was at this point in his training. However, he soon realized that his mechanic limb was missing, discarded at the training grounds. This was before he looked over at a certain Uravity to see the device gripped tightly between her fingers. He recalled trying to persuade her to give him the device back, saying that he was going to explain everything but Uraraka wouldn't bring herself to give it back, instead telling him to come back to their classroom after school in order to retrieve it. That was when he was confronted by the 5 people in the room right now and practically forced to sit down. Sorry, blanked out for a few minutes. What were you talking about, Uraraka? She sighed, and out of the corner of his eye, he saw the pacing girl's fists tighten ever so slightly. Well, Izuku, I asked you if you would mind explain what the hell happened just now? Izuku. Not Deku, Izuku. To merely hear that coming out of her mouth hurt him a little bit. She was the one to stand up for his degrading nickname, the one that made the pain he felt from Bakugo's usage worth it, the one who successfully changed his label as outcast to something that meant he was able to stand up against the very world itself, the one who stood by him. To hear her ignore that showcased her anger and her fury at this situation, how he was acting reckless and out of character when it came to this whole problem. He was usually so calculated, so meticulous in his decisions, but instead, he was just stumbling about like a child hooked up to overwhelming power. He wasn't in control at this point, and she and everyone else in the room had seen that. Tugging on his bandages, Izuku grit his teeth, smashing the pieces of cartilage against each other violently as he vowed to better himself once again. He was going to fight so that Deku would be the only thing he would be viewed as, the person who could rise up against difficulty and shatter any pathetic visages placed before him, and not the one who wore that title. Unceremoniously, turning his gaze towards the worried girl's face, the teen tried to steel himself so that he could face her honestly and not just implode with embarrassment or fear of disappointment. I was trying to figure out how to best use the new aspect of my quirk. He heard the girl's shuffling and pacing pause. What's that supposed to mean? This time, the question posed came from Kirishima. Tearing his eyes from Uraraka's skittering frame, he looked the confused crimson head in the eye, tracing the rough scar that lay there with his mind to distract himself momentarily. His quirk, we did tell you about it, right? On the other end of the classroom, Mina started off her sentiment very high and might, almost arrogant, before quickly descending into worry and anxiety when she recalled past events. Past events that Izuku wasn't present for and so had no proper say in this interaction, instead biding his time highlighting things in his head to avoid the poignant and debilitating stare of his rosy-cheeked friend. Nope. He was off doing stuff with Bakugo when we told the others. Toru answered off quite happily, the high-pitched voice erupting from the other end of the room as the chalk began to mysteriously doodle on the blackboard. The pink-skinned teen sighed. Why didn't you tell me sooner, too? But it wasn't important. If you reckon me looking sort of dumb is not important. What did you say, Mina? Ugh, forget it. From the side of the room, Ida finally decided to make his part in the conversation. Standing up in front of the group, the soft tapping of metal as the teen moved over to stand next to Izuku, the speedster's overwhelming form towering over the much shorter Quirk inheritor. We understand your conviction, Izuku. It's what makes you. However, what we do not understand is why you would require so much potential harm to activate it. As always, Ida was very straightforward with a sort of harsh, blunt honesty that threatened to break Izuku's skull once more, but now there was something else hidden below his language. Glancing up at the teen, the green-haired boy found his mind tilted at what he saw. Ida was perfectly still. Usually, he was quite active, always jittering and moving his arms that it seemed he was almost physically impossible to become still, but here he was, static. Izuku couldn't see his eye either, the strong glare from his glasses reflecting the starting setting sun that sat behind the teens. This was strange. Well, ever since my fight with Todoroki, my quirk seems to have taken on some new attributes that weren't there before. Like, do you remember how some people thought their quirk was something completely different to what it actually was? Water manipulation was actually the ability to condense and transmute the oxygen in the air to be more like water due to the presence of more hydrogen atoms, stuff like that. He paused. He had been rambling again. Lifting his head up. From the desk, he saw Ida standing before him, nodding his head in complete understanding while the other four were still quite confused. Uraraka seemed to understand most of it. It was the whole science aspect of it that she seemed to lose attention on. He couldn't see Toru, but the fact that he doodling had slowly become more and more shaky until it was now just a selection of shaky lines had answered his questions, and Mina and Kirishima were looking at each other in morbid confusion, twirling their fingers around each other while looks of perplexing origin consumed their faces. It took a while before said pink-skinned girl managed to speak again. Huh. Jay, just think of it as thinking your quirk is water generation when it's more water manipulation. At this, everyone seemed to pick it back up once more. So then what's this new, awesome quirk of yours then? Kirishima had asked a very valid question. For all they knew, his powers were the exact same due to the common acceptance of mystery around Izuku's original strength enhancement, but now that was being thrown out the window by the user themselves. So, what was it? It was here where Izuku began to fret. He didn't have a cover story ready for this. Before, when he just had the base quirk of one for all, it was quite easy to cover it up as being a separate strength quirk due to the complete variation in appearance whenever he and All Might unleashed an attack. This was now due to their side effects, but he had not known this at the time. And even now, it was actually very simple to cover up. All Might could not use pain inflicted onto him to power up his attacks after all. It was just the fact that he had to come up with the cover-up in such a short amount of time. Before it was just a simple strength enhancement quirk, a mass collection of power that I was able to summon at will with the side effect of the uncontrollable nature being the damage I received after the fact. And now it's more of my body attack itself in order to build up energy, damaging my nerves and receptors for a short amount of time with the energy given off from the start of my quirk, when my skin starts to get hot. Then, that pain generates more energy than at the initial activation, as pain is what brings about the energy required for the output, and so I can use it in a punch in my arms or I can use it in my legs to travel really long distances quickly at the cost of breaking the bones or tissue in the area that the quirk is used in. Fortunately though, the energy also activates a larger amounts of blood cells which clot the skin wounds and heal them at a much faster rate, while my bones are helped by an influx in chondroblasts which heal them faster. Glancing up from his rambling, he hoped that he had explained it to a degree to not only convince them all of his quirk. What he received in turn were stares that made him question if he was even speaking English. Even Ida looked slightly confused. In retrospect, my body requires pain as a stimulus to generate mass amounts of energy that fuel my body before releasing addition cells to help with recovery for a short time afterwards. Ooh. Sighing. Izuku thought that he was free before he was leapt at by Kirishima, the hardening hero visibly in at the newest discovery presented to him by the green-haired teen. Oh, that is so cool. You have to hurt yourself in order to use your quirk. That is so manly. Clapping Izuku on the back with a wide and toothy grin, the inheritor couldn't help but replicate it. It's also really stupid and really dangerous. Glancing ahead of him and away from the spiky-haired teen, Izuku let out a small sigh at the sight of Uraraka. Her eyes were filled with fury and anger, laced with bouts of annoyance and confusion, but the words that managed to roll off her tongue contained no malice and no hate, only care and comfort. All in all, it was a very confusing picture that, while settling the picture of a distraught and perplexed girl in the teen's mind, also made him contemplate his own situation. He had made her feel all these things, made her do this because of his messed-up quirk. Looking her in her eye, Izuku was about to speak up when a loud cough and the hard tapping of shoes filled the air. Now that's all fine and dandy, right? But please indulge, dear Izuku. What the hell do you need with this thing then? Practically skipping towards the group, who had unanimously decided to congregate around the Izuku's desk for whatever reason, Mina was accompanied by the faint sound of hollow metal as she moved. Following the noise to its origin, Izuku suddenly found his skin growing hot in embarrassment and under the heated glare of a certain gravity girl, her entire form somehow being consumed in a comforting rage as the pink-skinned girl near them. In her hand, Mina was carrying his mechanical limb, his device, his sking in a breath at the badly worded and really bad name. The teen looked at it as the handle jingled and shook around, clashing with the metallic frame of the device as it did and creating the ominous noise emanating from the girl's grasp. When she got near enough, she placed the spindly frame on the desk, wiping off her hands on her skirt before placing them on her hips and turning to Izuku with a look of playful terror in her eyes, knowing what this would mean for him purely from the look on his face. "Go on then, what's this thingy magej do for your quirk?" Staring down at the mechanical structure, Izuku relented as he picked it up. "So, when I was explaining my quirk, I told you all that my body needed pain to act as a stimulus for my quirk, that it allowed the release of energy which would then be used in my limbs as a source of power. I also explained that this stimulus can come from my own body, with a sort of precursor energy activating alongside it to provide pain initially so that the after effects and the primary source of energy can be used. However, at this point I don't know if that will do anything long term. I don't know if it'll damage me internally, even with the additional cells helping the recovery, or if it might damage me mentally. Think of this source of quirk activation as what happened at the UE Games, during my fight with Todoroki and how I sort of lost it." Gazing up at his impromptu audience to make sure that they were still following, he was met with a few small nods from Kirishima and Ida, showing that they were at least following this part of the explanation, but Mina and Uraraka reacted differently. Both appeared to be flustered at the mere mention of that fight, with said southern girl gaining a thick coat of red dusting her entire form as she avoided eye contact with his entire person while Mina was staring straight at him, lost in a swirl of lilac as she just lost herself to whatever she was thinking. Whatever had them up in arms, he couldn't tell, so Izuku just continued his talk. Anyways, the source that activates my quirk can also be external rather than internal, meaning that my body doesn't potentially suffer any psychological or internal damage that I am completely unaware of. Instead, if I am able to deal a significant amount of damage to myself with something on the outsider like a knife or just sheer damage to my body, I am able to use my quirk. This is just a rough prototype that I was testing out. The spines on the sides stab my skin just enough to generate the energy needed to use my quirk without seriously damaging my body. At the minute, it's the safest thing to do." Glancing down at the skeleton before him, Izuku began to outline it and look upon how it could be altered. Even in its short time of use, the metal coating had to scratch off, revealing the twisting frame below it in all of its rustic glory, while patches of dried crimson dotted the length of the appendage, complementing the dull sheen of silver that lay across it. In a way, it mirrored how Izuku's own life and attitude was panning out. He had only acquired adrenaline a short time ago and it had changed his future and his mindset exponentially, made him feel more alive and freer than ever while still chaining him to a harmful ideology that he knew was bad for him. This power that lay dormant inside of him had heightened his desire for being a hero, his want and strife for becoming someone of such a high caliber that it only managed to push him past all of his quirk's downsides. He could fight through the pain if it meant it could give back to everyone in his life, to All Might for giving him his quirk, to his mom for supporting him and helping him all his life, to his friends for being there and pushing him to rise above it all, and he could do all of that with his own power, with some that kept true to the value of All Might while still giving him a personal touch and patch of freedom. However, at the same time, it brought forth all of those thoughts from earlier, about how it made him unfit to have the mantle of the symbol of peace. At this point, Izuku couldn't tell if he was overreacting to this and just worrying over nothing or if this was a genuine concern. With his quirk being in its infancy, he was unable to gauge how others would view it, but it was a concern that had trapped Izuku in a vice-like grip of worry that he just couldn't shake. Adrenaline truly was a double-edged sword, no doubt about it. "Are you sure that this is the safest option, Izuku? I mean, I don't want to be rude or anything, but looking at your arms I'm not so sure." Hearing a soft, sweet voice by his ear accompanied by light breaths hitting the shell of his ear made the teen recoil in shock before figuring out that Toru had moved from her position from the blackboard, instead coming over to listen to his mumbling about his quirk. At the same time, she was softly running her invisible hand down his arm, smoothing over his bandages and the wounds inflicted by his quirk in a calm, comforting manner that allowed him to understand her feelings. Didn't mean he wasn't embarrassed and nervous at the thought of having any kind of girl this close to him. At this stage, I may have to be use bandages a lot, be, but compared to what the fight against Todoroki did to me, this truly is the best option. Without thinking, his scarred and damaged fingers crept up to the back of his skull, contorting and stretching around the cracks and fragmentations that lay there as a result of the fight, and the foolish actions he performed while under adrenaline's influence. Suddenly, his thought process was interrupted when a heavy hand hit his shoulder and forced him out of his head. Slowly turning his gaze up to where the impact came from, Izuku's brow soon became furrowed at the sight of Ida. His eyes turned to the ground. Ida. Izuku, I think that you should reconsider using your quirk in this manner. Looking ahead at his friend quizzically, he soon found that the stares of everyone else in the room followed to the tall hero in training. What did you mean, man? He just explained that he can't really use it without risking himself. Shoving his hands in his pockets, Kirishima began to lean against the desk in front of Izuku's, offering Ida his own perplexed view on the matter, unable to figure out why the teen would want to stop Izuku from using his quirk. I only mean that he should try and maneuver around this aspect of his quirk and use it like he used to. You mean using it to the point where it broke his bones? You sure about that, Ida? That is not what I am insinuating. Only that. Next up was Mina, offering her own point on the situation, providing a flaw to their speedster friend and his way of thinking. As she was talking, Izuku was just thinking, why would Ida be so against this idea? He had seen how he acted with his quirk before, so him hurting himself wasn't a new topic? Maybe it was the idea of prolonged exposure to pain would change him? That he wouldn't want to improve or better guarantee his own safety due to the power it offered him? No, it wasn't that. Glancing down at his damaged hands on the desk, he turned it so the palm was tilted towards him. There was another layer to this. Biting his lip, his eyes turned upwards to meet Uraraka's, the girl just as confused as he was. It was to the point where her anger and fury had subsided, replaced by complete confusion. Staring at her, Izuku began to think about what could have happened in the last few weeks that... He understood. This is about your brother, isn't it? All conversations ceased existence as soon as Izuku spoke up. Everyone turned their eyes towards him, but the teen was only focused on Ida and his reaction. He was silent for a few seconds before letting out a heavy sigh and turning towards his friend with a heavy expression in his eyes. I saw Tensei's body, Izuku. It was broken and beat up, so bloody that it made me want to GG. That was my brother, that was the pro-hero Igenium right there, destroyed in a matter of seconds. To me, that is what you are proposing we let happen to you, that we stand by and let you destroy yourself for the sheer purpose of being a hero. Subconsciously, Izuku squinted his eyes. Stand by? No, Ida, I just wanted to tell you why I need this device and anything like it in the future. Tomorrow, I'm meeting up with May again so that we can work on costume ideas to better get my quirk under control. If you want to talk to me about anything, do it, but you know that I can't just stop being a hero. It is that determination that scares me. My brother was the same way. He wanted to help everyone no matter the cost, be a great hero that made people smile no matter the cost. Just like you. And after everything that has happened with this hero killer, I'm scared that one day I will be back in that hospital, looking at you in that hospital bed, all because of your own quirk. This type of care and comfort had rarely been directed at Izuku, so at the minute, he felt overwhelmed. However, that didn't mean that he couldn't argue his point. Ida was trying to have him stop using this part of his quirk, the part that he felt so conflicted about, for his own sake. Yes, it was so that he and others wouldn't see Izuku beaten and battered, but that was their job as heroes, to take the damage that others couldn't. In an act of selfishness, the quirk inheritor shot back at Ida. Ida, thank you so much for your concern, but you have to understand that this is all I've ever wanted. As heroes, we have to be ready to put our lives on the line for other people, and even if I have to put myself at risk to even use my quirk, that is worth it if I'm able to save one person. My quirk, while not invincible, can help me bounce back from any damage I receive. I understand not to overuse it and rely too much on it, but it will help me. Not trying to be insensitive here, Ida. I really am, and it's out of respect for you and your brother, but I am not Igenium. The room seemed to freeze over slightly as Izuku spoke those last 3 words. It may have sounded harsh, especially coming out of someone like Izuku, but it was something that needed to be said. Locking eyes for a few seconds, Ida soon dropped. Then, he slung his bag around his shoulder and began to make his way to the door, but before he did, he managed to say one thing. "Neither am I, Izuku. Neither am I." Watching him about to leave, the teen tried to stand up, to get Ida back here to talk instead of just letting him leave and wallow. He was stopped by an invisible force, however, as Toru pulled him back in the same soft, calm manner that she had spoken to him with earlier. It was quite a departure from her bubbly, over-the-top self, but something told Izuku that this was more real than that was. Despite not being able to see her, the boy turned around to where his face would be and looked there with peril and regret in his eye. "Let him go for now, Izu, he just needs this time to think. He'll be fine soon, but for now, just let him be." Too engrossed in worry for his friend to notice the new nickname applied to him, Izuku just nodded and returned to his seat, head turned towards the wooden surface. Silence crept around the room for a few minutes before the loud beeping of a phone went off, alerting everyone to its presence. Kirishima was the source. Pulling out his phone, he looked through it quickly before sking on his teeth. "DMN. Listen, I've gotta bolt it, but thanks for telling me, Izuku. It helped me understand a little bit more. I'll be ready the next time we fight, got it?" Smirking slightly at the challenge, the teen nodded at his red-haired friend, earning a dry smile in return. Picking up his bag, Kirishima was about to leave but took one look at the group of 4 one last time before dashing out and jogging down the hallway to leave. Now that he thought about it, Izuku realized that they had been here for some time, with pretty much everyone else in the building having already left. He was distracted for some time before being coaxed back in by a cough right in front of him. So then, "Izuku." Looking up, the green-haired boy could audibly hear himself gulp at the glare he received in return, the intensity of which seemed to set the very room on fire. Uraraka was standing there, cross-armed and a pout adorning her face as she stared him down. She may have been trying to be more aggressive, seem angry and annoyed at what he just said, but instead he could just focus in on how her brow twitched alongside her mouth as she tried to remain stoic. To be honest, Izuku found it quite cute. "Uraraka? I can't just give up because of what my quirk is. Yes, it is dangerous, and yes, I understand the risks that it entails, but I want to be a hero and now I can be. I told you I was a late bloomer, so I haven't had the 10+ years all of you have had to train and get accustomed to it. I have to work harder to make sure that I don't lose control and end up hurting someone else with it, to make sure that whoever I save can be comfortable if I come to help them. Work harder to make everyone proud." Gazing back down towards his desk, Izuku could hear the sigh that emanated from Uraraka's mouth. Too scared of the reality of the situation, of having his dream rejected again like it had been so many times before, he didn't even look up from his desk, the desk which housed his beaten, bloody hands. They sat comfortably under bandages and curls of linen, hiding them away from the rest of the world, and even though he was unsure of his purpose, unsure of whether he could become the symbol of peace in this state, he was sure that he would try his near hardest to make that dream possible, and no longer have it squandered and shot down by those around him. Now, he would live for his own dream. Quietly, he heard the faint tapping of shoes across the wooden classroom floor until they stopped in front of his desk, and he watched in content and confused silence as the table bent slightly under the unexpected weight of another person, of Uraraka. Glancing up to meet her, he saw a comforting softness to her face which hadn't been there for some time. Calmly the girl began to move her tiny hand towards his, the size of his dwarfing hers, until she clasped her shut around his flesh. Undeterred by his confusion, she resumed running her fingers up and down the warm piece of linen. "No, Deku. I can't promise that I know how you feel, and I can't say that I completely support this silly mindset of yours. But the way you smiled just now, when you talked about your dream, it made me realize that I can't say that I hate the idea or say that I should be angry at you for your decision because I cannot bring myself to be any of those things." Leaning forward, she took more of his hand into hers and began to wordlessly undo the bandages, letting them drop to the desk with a soft thud. Then, the southern girl pulled and pushed the cat-like pads on her fingers across his numerous scars and scratches with reckless abandon. "We care for you, Deku. You need to remember that. We care for you so much that when we saw you jump into action today, When we heard you scream and shout, our hearts began to beat like crazy, and we didn't know if you were really all right or not. I was so scared for you." Pulling herself closer, she enveloped Izuku's top half in a tight hug, holding him closer to her chest while he froze, scarlet coating his entire form. "Please just be careful, okay?" "Why, sure." In the few seconds that she was holding him, Izuku could feel all the care and warmth that Uraraka felt towards him. It was like nothing else he had ever felt. He had never truly felt that much attention and worry for him from someone that wasn't his mother, and that in itself was enough to make him emotional. But it was more than that. It was that she was able to show this to him without speaking it. She could, and it would work, but she didn't have to. No, Uraraka could do it, make him feel like this without words, and that meant so much to him. "All right, lovebirds, let's get moving or Aizawa will chew us out for being here so long after school hours." Shooting away from each other, Izuku and Uraraka grew thick red blushes on both of their faces as they turned to see Mina's wide and sly grin adorning her pink face. Alongside her, Turu's clothes swayed and moved in spirals to show her impatient attitude as her bag, covered in colors and different stickers, swung around with her. Sighing, Izuku pushed himself away from his desk and grabbed his small yellow bag while Uraraka moved to grab her own bag. Offering each other one final smile, the two turned to their friends with an expected gaze. "Well, HM? Oh yeah. Do you mind if we walk with you guys? We sort of got ditched talking to you guys." Turu replied, the same bubbly tone present in her voice. It made Izuku pause. Now that he had been exposed to that softer, calmer side of her, this happier, over-the-top personality just seemed it seemed more unnatural, something made up, but to be honest, he didn't know the girl enough to take that guess to heart, so just let her be for the minute. Sorry about that. I don't worry, muscles. Anyway, you owe us now, so you basically have to let us walk with you. Sticking her tongue out at the boy, Izuku couldn't help but sigh at Mina's interactions with him. Didn't stop him from turning a shade of brighter red though. Didn't help when Uraraka got involved. "Dimin. She's really got us here, Izuku. Blackmail it is. See, can we just go, please?" Ida's head rung. It was a deep pounding that smashed and crashed against the walls of his mind, colliding against the fleshy walls with a fierce brutality that manifested throughout the rest of his body. His hands were coiled in on themselves, nails gripping and digging into his hardened skin while he paced and dashed around the room he was confined in, locked like a prison he entered of his own free will. If the boy was to identify and relate the sensation to anything, he'd relate it to running with his quirk. A harsh jet of air would shoot out, ricocheting from wall to wall in a burst of energy and aggression that tore and ripped at his head in clean and precise shots. A rough pounding and dragging urge grated and splintered the floor of his mind, kicking and sprinting all over his fragile state with careless abandon and reckless authority. A shocking blast of explosive heat shattered and caused a cataclysmic retreat within Ida, ambition and pride drying out and shriveling up as they lay dying, bathing in pride. Guilt and pride. That was all Ida's mindset boiled down to. Every key state, every emotion and action could be traced back to the all-consuming status of pride that ate away at his spirit, or the sickening companionship that guilt granted him, absorbing and indoctrinating the teen into a deprived cycle of shamed friendship. Even now, the trainee hero could feel the pulsing and breathing heart of his quirk shudder and shake, rattling and flaring up against the fabric of his clothing like. Now that Ida heard it, the shallow palpitations and shudderings sounded like a wounded creature, like a dying animal. It sounded as if his quirk was choking on his ambition, was being smothered by his guilt and forced to swallow his pride. Ida was the wounded animal, a sick and disturbed individual whose brain was eating itself as his body decayed into a mess of metal and flesh. However, deep inside, he knew he didn't have the right to feel this way, to feel hurt and injured. Not while his brother was sat right behind him. Stealing a breath from the air and forcing it inside himself, Ida turned from the open expanse of the hospital window and shifted back to meet the unopened gaze of his older brother. Tubes and wires prodded and branded Tensei, stabbing and draining him of the humanity he once held as a powerful and influential hero. To see him laying here, coddled in medical equipment and cradled by the soft beeping of his heart monitor, robbed him of that humanity in a world where the definition of human no longer meant what it used to. It was no longer the straight line it once was. He was having the life and reason he built up for others snatched from him in a cruel instance of madness. Followed by machinery. Ida's rage and anger bubbled over, sinking and melting into the puddle that was his emotional state, mixing with his sadness and tragedy that overflowed his body. The boy could feel his body quake in self-destruction and terror, his teeth mash and grind together in fury and fear, his eyes narrow and sharpen in desolation and retreat. Yet he knew he could not blame the machinations that shackled Tensei here. In fact, the slithering snakes of science that bit and injected his body with venom were some of the only things keeping him alive. No, the one to blame for his brother's suffering, for his brother's pain and absolution, for his brother's imprisonment was one man. A man plagued by the artificial tyranny of a villain, shrouded in the cloak of a hero. The hero killer, Stain. Eventually his brain overloaded, sparking and breaking as it was flooded by immediate thoughts of vengeance and retribution for his role model, to claw and claim back the life that was robbed from his brother. His eyes shook, leaking and brimming with tears as his hands gripped and dug into his shirt. Only the soft sound of quiet whimpering and the steady pulsing of the heart monitor echoed and shook throughout the room. Big brother. Raise your head, Titania. Ida's eyes exploded open, his lids shooting into the excess of his skull. Cautiously, he glanced up. Staring back at him, face and body obscured by masks and repulsions of medicine, was the battered and smiling form of Tensei Ida. His eyes were lulled, his entire face looked tired and like well-worn stone, eroded, damaged and cracked by fatigue. His hair was matted by sweat and blood, staining his creed and attention with impurity. His mouth was chalked and caged in by a plastic prison that siphoned and drove air directly into his collapsed lungs. His body was restrained and regulated by foreign agents that stabbed and tore into his flesh with reckless abandon and unrelenting force. His legs. Ida did not dare look down at his legs, for it might entirely crush his spirit and demon his soul into subjugation if he even dwelled on the grievous wounds that fostered during Tensei's apocalyptic encounter. He was a mess, a complete and utter mess of a man. A mess of a hero. Shaking his head free of those insidious thoughts and breaking the branches of tears that streamed down his cheeks, Ida forced his brother a smile. Hello, brother. I am very glad you are well. An exasperated sigh left Tensei's mouth, tiredness and pain oozing out through his breath. It was physically painful to watch Tensei move and act. Sking in a breath, he tried to lean up, shoving his pillows below his stagnant form, before slowly rising up to meet his brother eye to eye. He barely made it a few seconds before he started spluttering into the insides of his mask, blood and spit fogging up the plastic. Panic sprang up over Ida's form, the teen dashing forward to help his relation. Tensei! I'm fine, Tenya, sit back down. Pushing his body back against the steel railing, his breathing stilled with the rapid beating and pulsing of the heart monitoring shooting throughout the room. Sighing, Tensei shot back a strained smile to his younger brother. So then, Tenya, how's school been going for you this week? We haven't had much time to talk lately. Sking in a breath he didn't know he had let go, Ida pushed a hand to his chest and sighed. Rounding the side of his brother's bed, he sat down on the wooden chair that sat there. It is going very well, my brother. Everyone is just recovering from the sports festival and the class seems to be in correct form. Ah, well, that's very good. I've been catching up on a few of the fights after I woke up. You did really well, little brother. I'm proud of you. Suddenly, the tainted pride that had been eating away at Ida dispersed, instead being swallowed by a positive influence of pride. A large smile beamed on his face as he nodded at his brother. Yeah, brother. Thank you very much. It is a great honor to be complimented by a hero of your caliber, brother. Ex-hero now, remember? Suddenly a permafrost shrouds the room in cold. It was hard to breathe, the sudden exclamation of remembrance emerging in a horrid malformation of memory and forcing itself down each boy's throat, Tenya more than Tensei. Even after it had warmed up, even after the ice had thawed, making way for familiar conversation, Ida couldn't pull his head out of that statement. So, I'm not sure I've told you this yet, Tenya, but I met this really cool hero a couple of months ago, smart guy too. His quirk was super unique, something about gliding I believe. Anyway, I met him when we were on a jog and it was… Even as Ida nodded and motioned that he was listening, he wasn't. His head was numb. His mind was numb. His body was numb. Every word Tensei was spitting at him was just deflected by those words that cracked open his maw before. Ex-hero. Ex-hero. It just kept bouncing and shooting through his head like a rocket. His brother, the great and influential Ingenium, was no more. His empire of heroes would be passed on. His position as an amazing and incredible hero would be noted in the history books. His title would be relinquished. To hear him say it again, that he was paralyzed, meant that it was actually true and that it was a fact he had to face. Ingenium was dead, and he was supposed to be his successor. That very fact shook Ida so much that he almost felt like cracking, scattering his shattered shards all over his brother's feet, a testament to the complete and utter failure he would be as the next Ingenium. It shook and disturbed him, the amount of longing and trust that was being imbued into his legacy. Why was he being chosen to succeed? Compared to so many others, people like Izuku and Uraraka and Bakugo and Todoroki, his achievements were minimal and his judgment poor. He may act brash and brazen, authoritarian and smart, but in reality, he was merely the shell of his brother and everything he had come to be. It was so maddening and so insane of an idea that Ida just couldn't comprehend it. And the entire reason all of this pressure, all of this judgment, all of this pain and suffering was being placed upon his family was all due to one sick and deranged man. Gritting his teeth and clenching his fist around his leg, Ida's mind ignored all outward though and reason, all calling. Ida. He sacrificed his focus and logic of the current moment to dictate his reasoning and his attention on the hero killer completely. A mad psychopath that placed his brother in hospital and him doubting his place in society as a hero. A psychotic murder that trampled around Japan wreaking havoc on the innocent and the worthy. An absolute crazed maniac who feels as though his ideology and reasoning will triumph above those of the heroes. Ida's entire head swarmed and swam in the bloodlust of the hero killer, rivers and rivers of blood pouring and dashing throughout his skull just to cement the abominable and horrific acts of a man whose loyalties lay in the tactics of war and death. Stain reaps and commands death where he wishes and when he wishes, punishing those who would stand up to defend this country for what? Their bravery? Why did the actions of heroes not matter to Stain? Why did his brother's actions to Stain? Why will his actions not matter to stay? Ida. A cool, calming force struck down on Ida's coiled fingers, the warm and comforting presence of family leaking deep into his bones. Releasing himself from his rage, Ida slowly turned his face towards his brothers, panic and shame shining deep within his eyes as he gazed towards Tensei. In response, his brother just gave a calm and collected smile. You haven't taken up the name yet, have you? Ida sighed. Tensei always had a trick to figure out what he was thinking. No, not yet, brother. Any particular reason why? He was poising a question, but from the tone of his voice, the brief sprinkles and dips of serenity that littered his tongue, it was as if he could assume what Ida's answer was going to be, that his brother would not able to take on the mantle just yet. Hanging his head, Ida just sighed. I just do not know if I'm ready yet. I'm still in school and it's so soon after your attack that I just don't think it'd be appropriate at this time. And then there's also… Midway through his rant, he heard another coarse sigh emerge out of Tensei. Then, in a swift movement, the same hand that had been used to calm and relax Ida's turbulent spirit, jolted up to meet his head in a soft pat. It's okay, little brother, you still have plenty of time to become Ingenium. Ruffling his hair, he offered his brother another kind and heartwarming smile, one which showcased the pure radiance and passion that Tensei housed for his brother and his future career as a hero. He understood the burden that heroic actions brought, the torturous acts and recluses that the mind would wander to in tomes of pain and times where they were supposed to be strong. Sometimes Tensei even thought that maybe people forgot that heroes weren't just idols or advertisement or figureheads, that maybe they forgot that heroes were people too and that people were allowed moments of weakness and strife as well as those they may protect. He knew that burden. And he understood that this is what awaited Tenya in the future. So, he needed to shelter his fall, even ever so slightly. Pulling his hand off of his brother's head, he continued speaking. Living up to the name of a pre-established hero can be tough, let me tell you. It's an uphill battle that throws rock after rock after rock at you, never ceasing, not even when you reach the top. However, there is always an advantage to being a successor. You get the equipment and the tips and the tools from the predecessor to help you with the tough bits, yeah? So, in time, when you're ready, I will teach you how to climb and give you the tools needed to become Ingenium, Tenya. I promise. A moment of silence passed the two. Then, an emergent look of awe and joy overcame Ida's eyes, glazing over in the sheer relief and the sheer amount of pride that Tensei's words has imbued him with. The growth of corrupted pride that had earlier sat upon his heart had been cut away, its roots and branches torn from their sockets and left to burn. Now, he felt renewed, he felt empowered, and he felt enlightened by this new discovery, and the lights of his very soul were set ablaze. Shooting his hands up to his face, Ida began to gesture and command the air like a conductor. Yes, brother. Thank you for your kind words and guidance. I will surely grow and become a far greater hero with your words and wisdom. Tensei let out a hoarse laugh. Whatever you say, Tenya, just don't forget to follow your own words now and again. Plus, if you aren't going to become Ingenium anytime soon, maybe I can pick it back up, Ingenium, the wheelchair hero. Striking a dynamic and fluid pose as he moved, Tensei managed to elicit a few automated chuckles from his brother before his throat seized up and a riot of coughs and splutters shot up out of his mouth and all over his face mask. The harsh pings and clicks of the heart monitor bounced with disturbed excitement around the room to follow the tune of Tensei's suffering. Once again, panic broke through the flames within Ida, but a quick wave of his brother's arm paused his onslaught. The moment paused, the shuffling of cables and the creasing of plastic followed the agonizing smothering of Tensei's breath. Glancing downward at the floor, Ida's guilt began to eat away at him once more, being able to do nothing while his brother sat suffering. There was nothing he could do, no great plan to eradicate the damage inflicted to him, no victorious charge to lead a revolution against the perpetrator, no anything. Sin galloped into Ida's mind. Although he couldn't relieve Tensei's agony, take away his suffering, he could still find the man who committed this pain. He could find and take down Stain himself. Fury and vengeance ran over the teen's body, digging their stained claws into his feeble flesh and shattered mind to puppeteer his body like a marionette. Turning towards Tensei, Ida spoke up once more. I have to go now, brother. I have school work I must complete for the due date. Tensei quirked an eyebrow, the finale of his coughing fit finally subsiding. HM? Well, okay then, little brother. Knowing you, the due date probably isn't for a few weeks, is it, Tenya? Yes, you're right. Straining his head to look directly at his confused brother, Ida gave him a wide smile reminiscent of Tensei's own. But do not worry, brother, I will sort it out in time. However, to the man who so regularly gave out such smiles, something was off about his brothers. It was as if it had been warped, twisted and conjoined to some sickening part of fate that twirled and morphed the happiness on his face to rage. His teeth were grinding and mashing against one another in a way that seemed like a battle of cartilage. One set hammering down and bringing catastrophe to the ones below it, and his eyes were pulling against his skin, poking and dragging heavily along Ida's flesh in an uncontrollable and almost feral way. Something was off. Tensei just wasn't sure what. Pushing himself off the chair, the U18 began to collect himself and compose his things. Every now and again, Tensei would catch him when his facade dropped, making way for an icy cold face of malice and torment that thawed and froze anything it looked at simultaneously, stranding everyone Ida looked upon in a blaze of burning cold. To what he was having such a heavy reaction to why he had to trap himself between a shell of ignorance and the true scale of his plummeting emotions, that fact was unfortunately lost on his brother. Finally, Ida had reapplied his blazer and collected his bags, making his way towards the door. Swiftly spinning on his heel, Ida put on another manufactured smile for Tensei. Goodbye, Tensei. I'll be back to see you soon. As he went to open the door, he was halted. You have that hero experience thing soon, right, Tenya? The pause. A shuffle. I do, yes. Well, good luck on it and thanks for coming, little brother. Just don't do anything stupid. Bending his neck to look back at his idol, at his role model and the person who influenced his entire life and desire to become a strong and great hero, Ida told him the first lie he had ever uttered. I won't, Tensei. I hope you rest better tonight. Goodbye, brother. Goodbye, Tenya. Throwing open the door and storming out with renewed vigor, Ida collapsed as soon as he was out of sight. He deflated, his cogs and machinery slowing to a halt as he supported his malfunctioning body with the concrete walls off seclusion. His head was spinning, pounding even more than it was inside of Tensei's room. It was full of thoughts that stretched and breached the surface of his skull and brokered a fierce treaty of pain across his entire being. So many things swirled and swarmed his soft mind with poison and charms. So many things grew and embedded their glossy roots and tainted branches into his veins and arteries in the hope to drain his entire being of life and of reason. So many things pulled his body around. He was a puppet on the strings of his ideals. He felt unclean in his own skin, yet at the same time Ida felt liberated. He felt free and unshackled by the same biology which once bound him. Lifting a fist to meet his eye line, Ida felt a surge of action and a rush of adrenaline rocket throughout his frame. Whatever convictions and whatever doubts he had were nullified and disintegrate by the sheer effect and divination of his exaltation. Ida's prize was concrete. It was finalized and cemented to the foundation of his bones and mixed eternally into his blood, where it could imbue and grant a fullness to his condition. Tenya Ida felt absolute and total clarity in his mental track. He was going to take down the hero killer, punish him for his neurotic and damnable actions, and then claim back a piece of his life, of Tensei's life. This was his design. Picking himself up off of his supports, the inner working of Ida's gadgetry began to spring back to life, and the automated metal man began to trail off into uncertainty, a haze of vengeance and wrath leaking from his twitching and breaking body of steel. Ida vowed to destroy the ideology of the hero killer, to wipe clean stain from society. Yet the branches had grown deep, and his pride had become corrupt once more, pumping heartlessness through his bloodstream alongside victory. Ida had been poisoned by pride. On the other side of the solitary cage, Tensei sat bathed in silence. In the ex-hero's mind, something swarmed. He had witnessed something before Ida had left. He had seen something he had never wished to bear witness to. His little brother, the only person he ever wanted to look up to him and follow in his footsteps, was drenched in bloodlust and fury. Ida's face, contorted and bent into a snarl, pitted tooth against tooth in a grotesque and deadly machination of injury, while his fists were clenched so tight they looked like snowfall on his knuckles. Yet it was the maelstrom that brewed in his eyes which concerned Tensei most of all. A whirlwind of hate and animosity grew and festered in the whites of Ida's eyes, decaying and devouring them until it left nothing but a husk of his younger brother's shining light, one which had been snatched and stolen to make way for his rage. Buried deep below all of that hatred sat sympathy and empathy, which was what Tensei feared the most. It meant that Ida wasn't fighting and rebelling for his own fate. Instead, he was fighting for Teenyai's robbed life. A sudden chilling fear overcame Tensei as he thought about the implications and consequences of this revelation. Looking over to the window side, he let out a shaky sigh into the frosty air. Be safe, Ida. Please be safe. Izuku understood pain. To him, pain was no longer the sinister monarch that ruled and reigned over the biology of his condition. It had no throne nor crown to build its standing upon or to command his actions from. After only having won for all for a few months, Izuku had managed to unshackle himself from the tyranny of pain, unbolt and free of his confines through sheer force of will and utter agony. He had the scars, the trophies and the mistakes, from previous escape attempts and breaches of torment to showcase his devotion to the Empire, but now he had to carry those burdens past him. He had outgrown agony. Now, the physical strain of cracking a bone or splitting skin, the vast outpour of dripping blood or tearing sinew, was dwarfed to him. He had kissed agony and been bit by suffering so much that it was a trivial experience now, one Izuku felt more flustered by than one he dreaded. Despite this, The Quirk inheritor didn't revel in pain, he didn't wish it on others or wish to dive headlong into such a feeling. To Izuku Midoriya, the anatomy of pain was like being thrown into cold water, icy, freezing, burning and suspenseful all at the same time, drowning in surprise and tension yet in a burst of relief. The strain begins to swim and float in a bed of contentment. All for the greater outcome, and if he needed to trade blows with injury and suffering in order to break free of more restraints and to be greater than he ever could be on his own, then Izuku would take every hit head-on. However, the cruelty about pain is that its branches don't just embed themselves into one person, their nature is to seek the triumph from multiple hosts. And it was this fact why Izuku despised pain. Breaking out from his head, Izuku was brought back to reality by the wailing in the air and the wetness on his shirt. Glancing down at his chest, a mop of familiar green hair sat thumping itself against Izuku's body in rapid succession. Inko Midoriya, crying her eyes out into her son's chest. Izuku, I was just so worried. I thought why you might have died. Wah? It's okay mom, I'm fine see? Wah? My baby boy. Giving his mother a light smile as she still cried and sobbed into his chest, he watched on as her tears dropped and branched down his body, dripped and grew like leaves all over his pale flesh, crystalline roots and flowers springing up everywhere from the cracks and fissures in his skin. Izuku's eyes specifically followed the twisting roots that trailed over his scars and laceration. These were his rewarding for indulging in pain. The grooves and curves in his hands were an eternal reminder of his partaking in agony, the constant act reminding Izuku of all the damage he's caused himself, and the pain that was then inflicted onto other people because of him. More specifically, to people like the crying woman in this arm. Wrapping his arms around her, Izuku felt a few of his own tears pool at his eyes and drop onto Inko's head. Why did his pain have to screw with the lives of other people? Why what he did with his body or his ambitions hurt those who cared about him? Why did the selfishness that lay in his heart, his desperate desire to become a hero, his fulfilled love and want to help people, have to in turn mess up things up for a bunch of other people who are just on the sidelines? Sking in his held breath, Izuku sighed and sniffled. Harem. Before he could utter another word, Izuku felt a fierce, stinging hit strike his face. Wide-eyed he recoiled slightly, gasping with an open maw and crimson-skinned cheek. Before him, the shaken, whimpering form of Inko stood with columns of tears that dripped and sprayed the floor, her eyes full of a flood of shame and embarrassment, waterlogged freedom caging her eyes while a blazing fire of fury and maternal protection coated her entire being in the fires of motherhood. She stuttered and swayed as she spoke, drunk on her emotions and tears. I'm so sorry Izuku, but I had to watch you. I had to sit in our living room, in our house, watching you on our TTV as you beat yourself silly. I had to watch my son, my darling baby boy, break his body and then beat himself up not only once, but I had to watch you Izuku, stand up and destroy your body twice. And what was it for, huh? Tell me, what was worth you breaking yourself Izuku? Stumbling forward into the setting sunlight, Inko leaned forward, took the streaming and tearful mess that was her son's face, and began to thumb his cheeks and his eyes and any piece of skin she could come across. She imbued her entire body and her entire soul into those touches, all the care and warmth she was able to exude from her being into those few precious moments. Please Izuku, tell me. To that question, the UA student truly had trouble conjuring the words. Why had he done what he did? How did he summon up so much courage and energy to not only force Todoroki to accept his hatred and self-loathing the way he managed, but also to push past his own feelings of hatred and agonizing dystopia to continue fighting? What had helped him summon the strength and the reasoning to follow through with his preconceived goals which, by all means, should have crashed and burned into cinders, only instead, resulting in cracked cartilage and an empowered spirit? An easy answer to his quandary would be the power fueled by One for All. He had seen the eyes and been resurrected to enact more, to push himself even further than he had gone before, to be plus ultra. Izuku couldn't refute this fact. However, it wasn't just that. Perhaps it was some sort of lust for combat that drove him, An underlying euphoria which set off his senses and caused him to lose himself in his quirk and the powers vested in him by his predecessors. Perhaps it was an in-the-moment kind of experience where he felt ethereal for a few fleeting moments, where each shot of pain was like a bullet of enlightenment and understanding to his fragile soul. Perhaps there was an even simpler answer to his question. I think it may have just been pride, Mom. Glancing up through his bleeding eyes, Izuku peered at the shaken form of his mother, her head quirked, and her eyes squinted. Pride? But you've never been a prideful person? I know. It was just that in that moment, surrounded by the crowds and all the heroes and all my classmates, and after witnessing what Todoroki could actually do and how powerful he was, I guess I just needed to prove myself. He really is just so strong, and I knew how strong he would be if he used the full extent of his quirk. I suppose I just wasn't really prepared for how strong he could be. And if he was going to use the full power of his quirk, then I was going to use the full power of mine, even if that meant I have to hurt myself. Peering down even further, a drop of liquid drifted from his eyes and splattered against the uneven, fleshy pavement of his scared hands, once again reminding him of the pain and agony he put himself through and the outcome of it. I'm really sorry to make you or anyone else worry. I never ever want to do that, but if I'm going to be a great hero like All Might, then I need to always fight at full power and go above 100% effort, no matter what. I need to learn how my quirk works and control it, and that is going to take time and effort and maybe even blood and sweat and tears, but Mom, I need to do this, I just need to. I've been given this pow. It's a blessing I even got this power so late that now I have to catch up to everyone else. I am going to make you and everyone else proud, I'll do it. A moment of silence passed between the two. Then, the chubby hands of Inko shot up to wrap her son's head in her arms, shrinking to the floor with his head cradled in her arms. She began to slide his unruly curls, massaging and going over his scalp as tears dropped and wetted his hair. Oh Izuku, I'm already so proud of you. I just want you to be safe and happy, okay? I don't like seeing you get hurt, but I'll try and push through it, but I need you to promise me that you'll try your hardest to get stronger without resorting to hurting yourself all the time. A sniffle and a dry chuckle lit up the air. I promise, Mom. I promise I'll try my hardest. Squeezing her son into a tight body lock, the pair openly wept at each other. A certain aura washed over them as they conveyed their care and emotional ties to one another. The shackles and confines of pain and torment that had been crushing and carrying the pair over the last several ties were suddenly shattered into dust below the might of a mother's love. Although Izuku understood why this happened. His pain. His suffering. That was the catalyst for this intervention, this cry for help and worry from the person he could consider himself closest to, for it was the scars that littered his body and the scars that littered his soul that forced Inko to go through this torment. This is what Izuku hated about pain. Pulling his face out of the crook of his mother's neck, Izuku spoke up. So, Inko pushed her watery face away from her son. What is it, Izuku? You know how I'm going on that hero experience course in a few weeks. Well, I need a new costume for it since I ruined my old one, so I thought that maybe you could help me design it. A light, airy laugh danced through the skies. Of course, Izuku. However, I don't know if you really need my advice anymore. Well, you did really well designing the last one. So I thought if we worked on it together, then maybe we could come to a middle ground, maybe. Yes, son. Now come inside before you catch cold. This was what Izuku hated about pain, and he was going to make sure he minimized the pain he dealt to others. One way or another.